Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a world without walls, without central heating, without the promise of morning warmth or the certainty of tomorrow's meal. Tonight, we're drifting back, far back, to a time when winter wasn't simply a season marked on calendars, but a living presence that tested every breath, every heartbeat, every fragile flicker of human endurance. 25,000 years ago, across the frozen plains of what we now call Europe, small bands of people carved their existence from ice and stone. They had no books to record their struggles, no monuments to mark their victories. Only ash, bone, and the patient earth remember them now. This is their story, told softly, told slowly. A quiet remembrance of survival at the edge of extinction. But before we step back into that ancient cold, before we let the frost settle around us and the firelight dim, I have a small request. If your heart is ready to wander through these forgotten winters with me, let me know with a gentle tap of the like button. Subscribe so these quiet passages through history will find you again on nights when sleep feels far away. And leave a comment below. Tell me where you are right now, what time it is in your corner of the world. Some of you may be wrapped in midnight stillness, others greeting the early sun, or somewhere suspended between day and dream. Now, dim the lights if you can. Perhaps switch on a fan for that steady, soothing hum. Let your breathing slow. And together let's drift back to a time when every dawn was uncertain, and every fire was a small miracle against the dark. You wake before light touches the world. Outside your shelter, the landscape stretches endlessly, a vast canvas of blue-white snow that seems to have no beginning and no end. The horizon is a pale smudge where frozen earth meets frozen sky, and between them, nothing moves except the wind. The wind, always the wind. It doesn't gust or howl dramatically. It simply persists. A constant, hollow presence that finds every gap, every weakness, every tiny opening in your shelter. It slips beneath the hides hung across the cave entrance. It curls around your ankles when you stand. It steals the warmth from your breath before the vapor can even fade. This wind has been blowing since before you were born. It will blow long after you're gone. The cold here is not the crisp, invigorating chill of a modern winter morning. It is something older, deeper, the kind of cold that makes your teeth ache in your skull, the kind that turns your fingers clumsy and thick, as if they belong to someone else. The kind that whispers, quietly and endlessly, that today might be the day the warmth runs out. Beyond the cave mouth, where the snowdrifts pile against stone, you can sometimes see the dark shapes of pine trees bent low under ice. In the summer months, those brief, precious moons of relative warmth, this valley blooms with low grasses and flowers. Reindeer move through in great herds, their hooves thundering across the thawing ground. But now, in the deep winter, the valley is silent, empty. The reindeer have moved south, following some ancient instinct older than human memory. The mammoths, those great shaggy mountains of meat and fat, have retreated to sheltered ravines where tough grasses still push through the snow. You are left behind, you and your clan of perhaps 20 souls, clinging to this narrow cave, this fragile pocket of almost warmth, waiting for the season to turn. Food is never certain. Every morning begins the same way, with hunger. Not the hunger of a missed meal, but the deep, gnawing emptiness that lives in your belly like a second heartbeat. The kind of hunger that makes your thoughts slow and your movements careful, because energy must be preserved, rationed, protected like the fire itself. Your home is stone and smoke and the smell of living bodies pressed close together. The cave itself is not large, perhaps 15 paces deep, 8 across at its widest point. The ceiling slopes down toward the back, where the children and elders sleep, where the air is coldest, but at least there is protection from wind. The entrance faces northeast, which means it never receives direct sunlight in winter. An unfortunate placement, but caves are not chosen. They are found, claimed, defended. Previous occupants left their marks here. The walls are blackened from decades, perhaps centuries of fires. If you look closely in the dim light, you can see scratches and grooves where others once sharpened stone tools or carved mysterious symbols. Their meaning is lost now. Perhaps they were prayers. Perhaps they were simply the work of restless hands during endless winter nights. Animal hides hang across the cave entrance, a patchwork curtain of reindeer and bison and wolfskin stitched together with sinew. The hides help. They slow the wind, but they do not stop it. Air moves through hair and hide as water moves through cupped fingers. You can feel it always, that persistent chill seeking its way inside. During the worst storms, snow piles against the entrance until the hides bulge inward, heavy and frozen. Someone must go out, always someone must go out and dig a path, push the snow aside, maintain the opening, because a sealed cave, however warm it might seem, becomes a tomb when smoke has nowhere to go and breath has nowhere to escape. The fire burns at the center of everything. It sits in a shallow pit, lined with stones gathered during the summer and autumn. Around it, the ground is bare earth, packed hard by countless footsteps, warm to the touch even when the rest of the cave feels like ice. This warmth is precious beyond measure. This is where the clan gathers, where food is cooked, where tools are made, where stories are told in gestures and soft words. The fire is small, it must be small. Fuel is scarce. Every branch, every stick, every piece of dried dung or bone must be rationed carefully. A fire that burns too bright is a fire that dies too soon. So it smoulders, sending up a steady column of grey smoke that rises toward the cave ceiling, spreads across the stone, and eventually finds its way outside. Mostly. The smoke never fully leaves. It settles into everything, your hair, your skin, your furs, the cave walls themselves. After a few weeks of winter living, you cannot remember what clean air tastes like. You breathe smoke as naturally as you breathe cold. Your eyes sting constantly. Some of the elders have gone nearly blind from decades of this, their eyes clouded and weeping, unable to see anything but shapes and shadows. But the alternative to smoke is freezing, so you breathe it, you live in it, you accept it, the walls sweat. This is one of the strange facts of winter cave life. During the day, when people are active, when breath rises from 20 mouths, when the fire burns steady, moisture condenses on the stone walls. Droplets form and trickle down, collecting in small pools near the cave's edges. By morning, these droplets have frozen into delicate crystals of ice, beautiful and useless. Sometimes children touch them with curious fingers. Sometimes they press their palms against the ice flowers blooming on stone, but mostly everyone ignores them. They are simply another aspect of the cold, something to live with, something that cannot be changed. Around the fire pit, sleeping areas are claimed by custom and hierarchy. The strongest hunters sleep closest to the flames, where warmth is greatest. Women and children fill the middle distance. The elderly and sick, those who cannot hunt, who cannot gather effectively, find their places toward the cave's rear, where cold settles like still water. This arrangement seems cruel from a distance, but it is practical. Hunters must wake warm and rested. They must have strength in their arms and clarity in their thoughts. A failed hunt means everyone suffers. Everyone understands this. Even those who sleep in the cold accept the logic of survival. Still on the coldest nights, the divisions blur. Bodies pressed together regardless of status. Children wedge themselves between adults. A wounded hunter might find himself surrounded by women, sharing their warmth, receiving their care, and sometimes, though no one speaks of this openly, even the strongest hunter will quietly move toward the back, wrapping himself around an elder who is shaking too hard, who has grown too thin, who needs warmth more than pride. The day begins before dawn, though in deep winter, dawn is a relative concept. Someone must wake first. Usually it is the firekeeper, a role that shifts among the women, though occasionally a skilled elder man takes the duty. The firekeeper sleeps lightly, waking every few hours through the night to add fuel, to nurture the embers, to prevent that most catastrophic of failures, a dead fire. Relighting a fire from nothing is possible. It can be done. With a bow drill or hand drill, with dry tinder and patient friction, sparks can be coaxed from wood and stone. But it takes time, hours sometimes, depending on conditions. And hours without fire in deep winter can mean frostbite, hypothermia, death. So the fire never dies, cannot be allowed to die. The firekeeper rises in darkness, moves quietly through the sleeping clan, and kneels beside the embers. She, let us say she this morning, blows gently on the coals, watching orange light bloom in the ash. She adds moss, then small twigs, building the heat gradually. The smoke thickens, people stir in their sleep, coughing softly. As the fire grows, she adds larger wood, not much, never much, just enough to spread a small circle of warmth through the cave, just enough to take the killing edge off the cold. Others begin to wake. The hunters rise first, groaning softly as cold, stiffened joints protest movement. They are young men mostly, between their 15th and 30th winters. Some are scarred, claw marks from a cornered lynx, a poorly healed break from a fall on ice, the puckered flesh of an old spear, wound from a territorial dispute with another clan. They sit by the fire, silent and focused, chewing strips of dried meat saved from yesterday's meager meal. They check their weapons, spears with stone points, bound to wooden shafts with sinew and tree resin. They test the bindings, looking for any looseness, any weakness. A spear that fails during a hunt can mean injury. Injury can mean death for the hunter and perhaps for the clan. While the hunters prepare, others begin their own tasks. Women move to the cave entrance, pushing aside the heavy hides carefully, minimizing the gust of frigid air that rushes in. Outside, snow has drifted against the entrance again. It always drifts. Using flat shoulder blades from reindeer, worn smooth by countless repetitions of this same task, they dig and push and clear a narrow path. The wind hits them immediately, even wrapped in layers of fur, even moving quickly. The cold is shocking. It steals breath. It numbs exposed skin within heartbeats. They work fast, scooping snow, piling it aside, maintaining the lifeline between cave and world. Inside, elders tend to other necessities. They sort through the stored supplies, dried meat hanging from the cave ceiling, wrapped in hide to protect it from vermin. They check the water containers, usually made from hollowed logs or tightly woven baskets sealed with pine pitch. In winter, water is surprisingly difficult. Snow must be melted carefully in hide pouches heated with fire-warmed stones. The process is slow, tedious, and essential. Children, when old enough, help with small tasks. They gather kindling from the cave's supply pile, twigs and bark and dried moss collected during autumn, stored in the driest corner of the shelter. They learn by watching, by imitating, by receiving gentle corrections when they make mistakes. Some children show aptitude for tool-making. These settle near the fire with flint nodules and hammered ones, learning the ancient art of percussion flaking. They watch an elder's hands, how the stone is held, how the hammer falls, how a single blow can remove a perfect flake or ruin an entire piece. The sound of stone on stone rings softly through the cave. Tap, tap, tap. A rhythm as old as human thought, repeated endlessly, passed from generation to generation like fire itself. Warmth is not a given. It is something you must fight for constantly, through every moment of every winter day. The fire helps, but fire is a small sun with a short reach. Stand 2 paces away and you feel moderate warmth. Stand 5 paces away and you might as well be outside. The cold is not uniform, it pools in corners, clings to stone, radiates from the cave walls like inverse heat. So you stay close. Everyone stays close. During the day, work keeps you moving and movement generates warmth. Scraping hides, carving tools, preparing food. These tasks engage muscles, produce heat from within. But at night, when activity ceases, when the clan settles into sleep, the cold becomes predatory. Sleep in winter is communal by necessity. You lie down near others, sometimes pressed directly against them. Children are placed in the middle of sleeping groups, surrounded by adult bodies on all sides. They complain sometimes, they are too warm, too confined, unable to move freely, but this is safety, this is survival. A child who rolls away in sleep, who ends up alone at the cave's cold edge, might not wake in the morning. The furs you sleep under are thick and heavy. Multiple layers, reindeer hide with the hair left on, wolf pelts, bison robes. These are cured imperfectly with whatever brain tanning and smoking could be managed during warmer months. They retain some stiffness, they smell strongly of the animals they once covered, mixed with wood smoke and human sweat, and the faint, sour scent of imperfect preservation. The fur itches, always itches. Tiny fragments of hair work their way into your skin. Sometimes, small parasites, lice, fleas, make their homes in the furs and venture onto human bodies. You scratch absently through the day, accepting this discomfort as part of existence. But without these furs, you would die. So you wear them, sleep under them, wrap them around yourself until you resemble the animals they came from. On the coldest nights, when even multiple furs and shared body heat feel insufficient, the clan sometimes brings in animals, not prey, companions. The dogs that follow the clan, half-wild creatures descended from wolves, are invited into the sleeping area. They curl against human bodies, adding their warmth to the collective heat. There are stories, told in hushed tones, of desperate winters when wounded wolves were kept alive inside the cave, their warmth valued more than the meat they represented. Whether these stories are true or merely cautionary tales, no one can say. But the principle is sound. Warmth is warmth, regardless of its source. Frostbite is common. You learn to recognize the signs early. Fingers or toes that turn white, then grey, that lose sensation entirely. At first this seems like a blessing, no more pain from the cold, but you know better. Loss of sensation means dying tissue. The treatment is gradual rewarming, painful and dangerous. Sometimes the flesh recovers, sometimes it blackens and falls away, leaving stumps where fingers once were. You see this among the elders, missing toes, hands with fewer fingers than they should have, ears reduced to small, scarred nubs. These are the markers of survival. Each missing piece of flesh represents a winter survived, a cold night endured, a moment when death came close but did not take you. You try to prevent it, you wrap your extremities carefully, you check your fingers and toes whenever you come inside from the cold. You watch others, warning them when you notice the telltale white patches forming. But prevention is imperfect. Winter is patient and thorough. It takes its portion from nearly everyone. Words are sparse in winter. Speaking requires breath, and breath is warmth carried away on vapor. So the clan communicates in other ways. Gestures, glances, touches. A raised hand means wait. A pointed finger means look there. A hand on a shoulder can mean "well done," or "I see you struggling," or simply "you are not alone." This economy of language creates a particular kind of intimacy. You learn to read faces in firelight, to interpret the subtle shifts of expression that reveal hunger, pain, exhaustion, determination. You become attuned to others in ways that words could never accomplish. Silence, too, becomes meaningful. A comfortable silence among people working, the soft sounds of tools and tasks, the crackle of fire, the wind outside. This is companionship without effort, connection without demand. But tension exists. Hunger makes people irritable. When rations are short, when hunts fail repeatedly, when the stored food dwindles faster than the winter passes, tempers fray. Small disputes arise: who took more than their share, who didn't contribute fairly to a task, who made a careless mistake that cost the group. These conflicts must be managed carefully. The clan is too small to afford lasting rifts. Arguments are settled quickly, sometimes by elder mediation, sometimes by the simple exhaustion that prevents sustained anger. Physical altercations are rare and seriously discouraged. Injury weakens the entire group. A broken bone, a deep cut, even severe bruising can reduce someone's ability to contribute to survival. The clan cannot afford such waste. So anger is swallowed, resentment is buried, and cooperation continues because cooperation is life. Yet within this harsh pragmatism, tenderness exists. You see it in small moments. A mother checking her child's hands for frostbite, her touch gentle despite her own exhaustion. A hunter sharing his portion of meat with an elder who can no longer hunt, doing so quietly without drawing attention. Young people sitting with the very old at night, listening to stories told in gesture and fragment, keeping company in the dark hours. There are rituals for endurance. Some clans hum together before sleep, not quite songs, but rhythmic sounds that comfort in their repetition. The melody, if it can be called that, is simple and ancient. No one knows who first hummed it. Perhaps it arose spontaneously, born from shared need, shaped by countless throats over countless winters. The humming settles into the smoke, mingles with the fire's crackle, becomes part of the cave's evening atmosphere. Children fall asleep to this sound. Elders close their eyes and let it carry them toward rest. Some nights carved bones are brought out, small pieces of antler or mammoth ivory, etched with marks that might be tallies or symbols. These are handled reverently, passed from hand to hand, then buried beneath the fire pit before sleep. A ritual of luck, perhaps, or simply a way to feel some control over the uncontrollable. Death, when it comes, is acknowledged quietly. An elder who doesn't wake one morning. A child who grows still despite being wrapped in warmth. A hunter who doesn't return from the frozen landscape. The body is treated with care. Wrapped in furs, carried to a place beyond the camp, sometimes placed in a shallow depression and covered with stones. Not buried deeply, the ground is too frozen for that, but protected from immediate scavenging at least. Before sleep on the night after a death, the deceased's name is spoken, just once, a murmur around the fire. Not a grand ceremony, just recognition, memory, the acknowledgement that this person existed, contributed, mattered. Then life continues, because it must. Not every moment is struggle, not every hour is suffering. There are times, rare and precious, when conditions align to create something approaching comfort. Sometimes a hunt succeeds spectacularly. A mammoth brought down more meat than the clan can immediately consume. On such nights, the fire is fed generously. Mammoth bone burns hot and long, its marrow rendering out in thick, nutritious fat. The cave fills with warmth that reaches even the far corners. On these nights, bellies are full. The constant gnawing of hunger recedes, replaced by the heavy satisfaction of plenty. People sit upright instead of hunching against cold. They talk more freely. Someone might begin a story, not the survival instructions passed from elder to young, but an actual tale. A hunting adventure embellished with danger and humor. A memory from summer, a fantasy about spring's return. Children laugh, that strange, almost forgotten sound. They play briefly by the fire, their shadows dancing huge on the cave walls, before exhaustion pulls them towards sleep. You sit, watching the flames, feeling warmth soak into your bones. For this one night, winter feels survivable. More than survivable, conquered. The fire sends up sparks when fresh bone is added. These bright points of orange light rise into the smoke, float upward toward the cave ceiling, fade into darkness. They are like small stars dying, each one a momentary brightness before extinction. You watch them rise and disappear, rise and disappear. The repetition is hypnotic, calming. For this brief moment, this fragile island of warmth in an ocean of cold, hope feels possible. Tomorrow the cold will return. The hunger will return. The endless work of survival will continue. But tonight the fire burns bright. Tonight there is warmth. Tonight you are alive, and that is enough. Let us now turn our attention to a single life. One voice among the countless thousands who lived and died in these frozen ages, leaving no name carved in stone, no monument to mark their passing. We will call her Kaura. The name itself is imagined, a sound that might have existed, shaped by a tongue and language lost to time. But the life is real, drawn from evidence found in ash layers and bone arrangements, from the patient archaeology of ancient hearths, from the universal human patterns that transcend millennia. Kaura is 16 winters old when she becomes her clan's primary firekeeper. The role is not chosen through ceremony or declaration, it simply happens. The previous keeper, Kaura's mother's sister, grows too ill to maintain the night watches. Her coughing disturbs the clan's sleep. Her hands shake when she tries to feed the flames. And so quietly, naturally, Kaura begins to wake in the dark hours, to tend what must be tended. At first, it feels temporary. Surely her aunt will recover. Surely this responsibility will return to older, more experienced hands. But winter deepens. Her aunt does not improve. And gradually, without words, the clan accepts the shift. Kaura is the firekeeper now. This is her burden, her sacred trust. The fire must never die. This truth lives in her chest like a second heartbeat. She feels it when she wakes, when she eats, when she lies down to sleep. The fire must never die. Everything else, hunger, exhaustion, pain, is secondary to this imperative. If the fire dies, relighting it becomes an ordeal that can consume an entire day. She has seen it done only once, when she was small, when a freak wind gust blew through the cave and scattered embers beyond recovery. She remembers the elder men working frantically with the fire bow, spinning a wooden spindle against a wooden base, creating friction, heat, the desperate hope of spark. She remembers how long it took, how the cave grew colder with each passing hour, how the children were wrapped in every available fur and held close, how people's breath became visible even inside the shelter. She remembers the collective relief when smoke finally curled from the tinder bundle, when flame was born again from nearly nothing. She will not allow that to happen during her watch, cannot allow it. So she sleeps differently now. Not the deep, surrendering sleep of childhood, but a lighter rest, perpetually half-aware. Her mind keeps count without conscious effort, approximately 2 hours since the last feeding. Time to wake, time to add fuel. She rises in darkness so complete that she cannot see her own hands, but she knows the cave's geography by touch and memory. 3 steps forward, slight angle left, 2 more steps, and her foot finds the warm earth near the fire pit. She kneels. The embers glow faintly, dark red with ash-grey crusting over them. She can feel their heat against her face, subtle, precious. She blows gently. Once, twice. Orange light blooms beneath the ash, revealing the coal heart of the fire. She adds dry moss, watching it smoke and then ignite with a small whisper of flame. Then small twigs arranged carefully to allow airflow. The flames grow, casting dancing shadows against the cave walls. Around her, people sleep on, undisturbed. This is how it should be. Her work is invisible, successful only when unnoticed. She adds slightly larger wood, never too much, always rationing, always conscious of the limited supply, and watches until the fire stabilizes. Then she returns to her sleeping place, lies down, and drifts back into that strange half-sleep that will break again in another 2 hours. This is her rhythm now, this is her life. Her hair smells perpetually of smoke. Not the pleasant smell of an occasional campfire, but the deep, ingrained scent of constant exposure. She can taste it when she wakes, acrid and woody on her tongue. Her skin has taken on a faint grey pallor from the smoke, and her eyes water constantly, producing tear tracks through the soot dust that settles on every surface, including her face. Her hands develop calluses in new places, from handling wood, from the specific grip required to arrange fuel in the darkness without disturbing the sleeping clan. Her fingertips are sometimes burned, just slightly, from pieces of wood that proved hotter than expected. But these are small prices. Acceptable prices. The fire lives, the clan survives. This is enough. Kaura does not think of herself as important. The concept would seem strange to her, almost meaningless. She is simply doing what must be done. Others hunt, others gather, others scrape hides and knapstone and care for children. She tends fire. Each role necessary. Each role part of the whole. But in the deep night, when she sits alone by the embers while others sleep, her thoughts drift into territories she cannot fully name. She watches the fire as if it were alive, and in a sense, it is, consuming, growing, diminishing, requiring constant care like any living thing. Sometimes she finds herself speaking to it, wordless murmurs under her breath, sounds of comfort or encouragement. "Stay," she whispers to the flames, "stay with us." The fire, of course, does not answer, but it seems to listen. It continues burning, faithful in its way, as long as she feeds it. Her dreams, when they come in those brief intervals of deeper sleep, are strange and fragmentary. She dreams of walking through snow that never ends. She dreams of mammoths moving in slow procession across white plains, their tusks catching pale sunlight. She dreams of her mother, who died 3 winters ago, who appears in dreams exactly as she was, scarred hands, smoke-grey hair, eyes that somehow conveyed both exhaustion and tenderness. Sometimes she dreams of fire itself. Flames that dance with purpose, that form shapes almost recognizable before dissolving back into chaos. She wakes from these dreams feeling unsettled, though she cannot say why. In her waking hours, she develops a private mythology around the fire, nothing she would speak aloud, just thoughts that comfort her during long, solitary watches. She begins to believe the fire has memory, not human memory exactly, but something older. Each time fuel is added, each time breath coaxes life from dying embers, the fire remembers. It remembers every hand that has fed it since the beginning, since the first person in the first winter discovered that flame could be kept, maintained, preserved through the cold dark. The fire pit her clan uses has been active for generations. The ash beneath today's flames contains the ash of fires tended by her grandmother, her great-grandmother, ancestors whose names are lost, but whose care is present in the very structure of the hearth. When she feeds the fire, she is joining this lineage. She is adding her effort to an unbroken chain of effort, stretching back beyond memory. This thought comforts her during the hardest watches, when exhaustion makes her hands clumsy, when the cold seems to press in from all sides, when she questions whether she has the strength to continue. She is not alone. She has never been alone. Every firekeeper who came before her is present in these flames, in this ritual of care. The winter when Kaura is 19 is particularly harsh. Snow falls for 8 days without ceasing. Drifts pile against the cave entrance until even digging through them becomes dangerous. The snow is so deep, so heavy, that it could collapse inward and trap someone. The hunters cannot go out, cannot see more than a few arms' lengths through the white storm. To venture into such conditions would be suicide, easy to become disoriented, to lose direction, to freeze within minutes. So the clan waits. Eating stored food, watching supplies diminish. The meat hanging from the cave ceiling grows scarcer each day. What was once a respectable supply of dried reindeer and bison now dwindles to a few tough strips that must be divided carefully among many mouths. Hunger sharpens. Children cry more frequently. Adults move more slowly, conserving energy. The elders eat less, insisting the younger, stronger members need the food more. This is both generosity and pragmatism. The clan's future survival depends on those who can still hunt, still gather, still reproduce. The hunters pace like caged animals frustrated by forced inactivity. They check their weapons repeatedly as if preparing will somehow change the weather. They stand at the cave entrance, peering into the white chaos, looking for any break in the storm. None comes. 8 days, 9, 10. The fire becomes even more critical. It is the clan's center, its comfort, its source of warmth when bellies are empty and hope feels thin. But the fuel supply, like the food, is limited. Kaura watches the woodpile shrink, watches it approach the threshold where rationing must become even more severe. She starts burning smaller fires, just enough to prevent freezing, not enough to provide real comfort. People huddle closer together. Complaints are few, everyone understands the necessity, but she can see the suffering in their eyes, in the way they wrap furs tighter, in the way they shiver even inside the shelter. On the 12th day, the storm finally breaks. The hunters leave immediately, desperate, driven by the knowledge that the clan cannot survive much longer without fresh meat. They are gone from before dawn until after dark, and they return empty-handed. No game to be found, all animals having taken shelter or moved to lower elevations during the storm. The same happens the next day, and the next. Kaura continues tending the fire, but now she must make impossible choices. The wood supply is nearly exhausted. She begins burning the handles of old tools, wooden shafts from broken spears, the hafts of worn hand axes, items that might have been repaired and reused, but survival requires sacrifice. No one protests, everyone understands. Still the hunters fail. The animals have scattered or died, or gone so far away that finding them would require days of travel the clan cannot afford. Kaura stares at the remaining fuel. 2 days of normal burning? Maybe 3 if she keeps the fire barely alive. After that, she makes a decision without consulting anyone. It is her responsibility, her burden to bear. That night, while others sleep, she takes her sleeping board, a flat piece of wood she lies on, which keeps her body slightly elevated from the cold cave floor. It is precious to her. She spent days finding the right piece of driftwood by the summer river, wore out a good stone blade, shaping it smooth. It is one of the few items that belongs to her alone. She breaks it into pieces and feeds it to the fire. The wood is thick, well dried. It burns hot and steady, giving the clan several hours of genuine warmth during a particularly bitter night. She sleeps on bare earth afterward, wakes with the cold having seeped into her bones more deeply than usual, but the fire lived through the night. That is what matters. She burns other personal items over the following days: a carved bone she used to play with as a child, a particularly nice hide scraper, a wooden cup she shaped herself. These sacrifices are silent, private. No one notices exactly what she feeds to the flames. They see only that the fire continues, that warmth persists despite dwindling supplies. On the 18th day, the hunters finally succeed. They bring down a young mammoth that had been separated from its family group, weakened by the storm. It is not a large specimen, but it is meat and fat and bone, enough to pull the clan back from the edge of starvation. That night, mammoth bones fuel the fire. The cave fills with warmth. People eat until they are satisfied. And Kaura sits by the flames she kept alive through the worst of it, watching sparks rise into darkness, feeling exhaustion settle over her like a heavy fur. Someone will carve her a new sleeping board eventually. Or perhaps she will carve one herself when spring comes and there is time for such things. But for now, the bare earth is enough. The cold is manageable. The fire lived. The clan survived. This is her purpose. This is her gift. Winter is long, and in its depths, humans reveal themselves. Kaura notices things others might miss. She is awake during the quiet hours, witness to moments of vulnerability that the day conceals. She sees the elder man who sits up some nights, unable to sleep, staring into the fire with a look of profound sadness. She never asks why. It is not her place. But she makes sure those nights the fire burns slightly brighter, offering what comfort she can. She sees the young mother who rocks her baby with a particular desperation, singing soundlessly, trying to soothe a child who cries from hunger the mother cannot satisfy. Kaura makes sure that woman sits closest to the fire, receives what small additional warmth might ease the baby's discomfort. She sees the hunters sharing their portions with each other, subtly, almost secretively, taking from their own meager rations to supplement a companion who seems weaker, more worn. These small acts of care move through the clan like water moving through stone, slowly, quietly, shaping everything over time. One hunter in particular draws her attention, though she tries not to show it. His name, in her mind, is simply Taran. He is perhaps 20 winters old, tall and lean in the way hunters often are, built for endurance rather than bulk. He has a scar across his left cheek from some past encounter, and his hands are always slightly scarred from weapon work. He is not the strongest hunter, not the boldest, but he is steady, reliable. He brings back food more consistently than flashier hunters who sometimes triumph spectacularly, but often fail. She notices him because of his hands. During a particularly cold snap in her 20th winter, Taran returns from hunting with his fingers gone white and stiff. Frostbite, obviously, in the early stages. He tries to hide it, wrapping his hands in his furs, but Kaura sees. Without speaking, she gestures him to the fire. He hesitates. The fire is precious space, already crowded with children and elders who need the warmth most. But she gestures again, more insistently, and he comes. She takes his hands in hers, gently, carefully. They are like ice, barely functional. She holds them above the embers, not too close, which would damage the tissue further, but near enough that heat begins to work into the frozen flesh. He watches her face while she works. She can feel his gaze, but she keeps her attention on his hands, willing warmth into them, monitoring the return of color to his fingertips. They do not speak. Around them, the clan goes about its evening routine, preparing for sleep, tending to small tasks, murmuring in low voices. The fire crackles, smoke rises, wind sounds outside the cave entrance. Gradually, painfully, sensation returns to his fingers. She can tell by the way he winces, the way his jaw tightens. The return of feeling is agony, worse than the numbness that preceded it. But it means the tissue lives, means he will keep his fingers. When she finally releases his hands, he flexes them slowly, testing. Then he looks at her, really looks at her, and something passes between them that has no name in any language. Not love, exactly. Not yet. But recognition. Gratitude. The acknowledgement that she saw him when he was vulnerable, and she helped without judgment, without demand. He returns to his place among the hunters. She returns to her fire-keeping duties. Life continues as it always has. But afterward, she notices him noticing her. He makes sure she gets a fair portion when meat is distributed. He brings her particularly good pieces of kindling when he finds them during hunts. Small gestures, easily missed by others, but significant to her. They rarely speak directly. There is no privacy in the cave, no opportunity for conversations that do not involve the entire clan. But their communication exists in glances, in small courtesies, in the way they orient toward each other, even while engaged in separate tasks. It is enough. For now, it is enough. One night, during a particularly cold stretch, when even sleeping in groups provides barely adequate warmth, she wakes to find him sleeping near her position by the fire. Not inappropriately close, the fire area is communal space, but closer than strictly necessary. She understands. He is offering his warmth, his presence, his protection in the small ways available to him. She adds slightly more fuel to the fire that night, allowing it to burn a bit brighter, warming both of them more thoroughly than rationing would normally permit. This small extravagance is her response, her acknowledgement, her gift. Outside, wind howls across frozen plains. Inside, two people share warmth by a fire older than memory, finding in each other a reason to keep the flames alive through one more night. Spring comes eventually. It always does, though each winter makes you doubt. Kaura sees 23 winters, then 24, then 25. Years blur together, marked by the same rhythms: cold, hunger, endurance, relief. She and Taran become a pair, recognized by the clan. They share furs. They work in comfortable silence. When she bears children, first a daughter, then a son, he is gentle with them in ways that surprise her, his scarred hunter's hands carefully cradling small bodies. Her daughter learns firekeeping by watching, by helping with small tasks, by absorbing the rhythm of night watches and careful rationing. Her son becomes a hunter, following his father on expeditions, learning the patient skills of tracking and waiting and striking at the perfect moment. Kaura's hair goes grey early, though she is still strong. The smoke has marked her. Her hands are permanently scarred from 1,000 small burns. Her eyes have the clouded quality of someone who has breathed too much smoke for too many years. But the fire has never died, not once during her tenure. This is her pride, though she would never speak it aloud. In her 31st winter, an age few reach, she develops the coughing sickness. It starts subtly, a tickle in the throat, a slight wheeze when breathing, but it progresses, becoming deeper, more persistent. Some nights she coughs so violently that she cannot tend the fire, and her daughter must take over the duty. She knows what this means, has seen it before. The cough that settles in lungs and does not leave. She continues working as long as she can, but gradually, inevitably, the responsibility shifts fully to her daughter. The transition happens naturally, wordlessly, just as it happened when Kaura herself became the keeper. One night, during a moderate winter that is neither particularly harsh nor particularly mild, she lies down to sleep and does not wake. There is no drama, no final words, just the quiet cessation of breath, a life extinguishing as gently as an ember fading to ash. The clan mourns her in their quiet way. Her body is wrapped in the best furs they can spare and carried to the burial ground beyond the camp. Taran walks beside her body, one hand resting on the wrapped form, his face expressionless in the way of deep grief. They place her beside the old fire pit, the one that was abandoned years ago when the clan shifted to a different cave in the valley. It seems fitting. Let her rest near fire, even in death. But before covering her with stones, someone, her daughter perhaps, or Taran, or one of the elders, places charred sticks beside her body. 6 pieces of burned wood arranged carefully. It is a small gesture, simple, but it carries meaning. She fed the flame, she kept us warm, she gave her sleep so we could rest safely. After she is gone, her daughter keeps the fire through that winter, and many winters after. She teaches her own daughter the art of night watches, of careful rationing, of breathing life into dying embers. The story of Kaura slowly becomes legend. Not grand epic, but quiet remembrance. When women gather to prepare hides, someone might say, "She kept the flame through the great storm," and others nod, remembering or having heard the story from their mothers. Eventually, a tradition develops. When a new firekeeper takes on the role, she is given a piece of charred wood from the main fire, a Kaura ember, they call it. This charcoal is kept safe, carried when the clan moves to seasonal camps, used to start new fires when needed. It is said that every fire the clan lights contains a spark of the fire Kaura tended, that her breath, blown across embers 300 generations ago, still lives in the warmth that keeps them alive. This is not literally true, of course. Fire is simply fire, a chemical process, oxygen combining with fuel. But humans have never been content with literal truth. They need meaning, they need connection to those who came before. So the tradition persists. The Kaura ember passes from hand to hand, generation to generation, a tangible link to one woman who gave her sleep, her comfort, her health, her life to keep others warm. In the archaeological record she does not exist, no name carved in stone, no monument, no grave marker that survives, but in the ash layers deep in ancient caves her work remains, blackened earth, charcoal fragments, the circular arrangement of fire-cracked stones that mark where hearths burned, season after season, year after year. Someone tended those fires, someone woke in darkness, someone sacrificed sleep and comfort to maintain the flame. Her name was Kaura, or it might have been something else entirely, in a language no human ear will ever hear again. But she was real, and what she did mattered. The fire lived, the clan survived, and the memory of care persists, buried in ash, waiting to be discovered. Let us shift now from the imagined to the discovered, from the story we constructed to the evidence that inspired it. Across Europe, in caves that once sheltered our ancestors, archaeologists work with brushes and sieves, with patience and careful documentation, uncovering what winter left behind. They find hearths, hundreds of them, thousands, These are not dramatic discoveries. No gold masks, no elaborate tombs, no treasures that make headlines or fill museum galleries with crowds. Just blackened earth. Circular arrangements of fire-cracked stone. Layers of ash compressed by millennia into dense, dark strata that speak, if you know how to listen, of countless cold nights survived. Each hearth represents a fire that burned, and each fire represents human hands tending it, human breath coaxing it to life, human need driving its maintenance through the long dark. The discovery of a hearth is often anticlimactic. A slight discoloration in the soil, a concentration of charcoal fragments, stones that have been heated and cooled so many times they have cracked into distinctive patterns. To the untrained eye, these features might seem like natural variations in the earth, barely worth noting. But to the archaeologist who has spent years learning to read the subtle language of stratigraphy, each hearth is a revelation. The ash itself is a text, though one written in chemistry rather than words. Archaeologists can analyze these ash layers with remarkable precision. They can determine what was burned, wood species, animal bones, plant materials. They can identify the temperature at which fires burned, which reveals how well maintained they were, how much fuel was available, how desperate or comfortable the occupants might have been. Modern analytical techniques allow researchers to extract astonishing amounts of information from what appears to be uniform grey powder. Microscopic examination reveals the cellular structure of burned wood, allowing species identification. Pine burns differently than oak. Birch leaves different residues than willow. Each tree species represents a choice, a decision about what fuel to gather, what resources were available in the surrounding landscape. They find microscopic traces of food preparation, fat molecules absorbed into the earth, protein residues on stones used for cooking. They find evidence of tool manufacturing, tiny flakes of stone, fragments of bone that show cut marks and polish from handling. The fat molecules are particularly informative. Different animals produce fats with distinctive chemical signatures. Mammoth fat differs from reindeer fat, which differs from fish fat. By analyzing the molecular composition of lipids preserved in hearth sediments, researchers can determine what was cooked and therefore what was hunted, what was available, what sustained these communities through the winter months. And in the arrangement of these materials, in the spatial relationship between hearth and sleeping area, between work zone and storage space, patterns emerge. These patterns tell stories. A hearth with multiple ash layers, each carefully cleaned and rebuilt atop the previous one, suggests long-term occupation. Perhaps a winter camp returned to season after season because the location offered shelter, water access, proximity to game routes. The successive layers speak of intentionality, of planning, of people who knew they would return and prepared accordingly. Some hearths show evidence of careful maintenance that borders on the obsessive. Ash swept to the edges, stones rearranged to optimize heat reflection, new fuel added in patterns that suggest deep understanding of combustion dynamics. These were not casual fires lit and forgotten. These were fires that received constant attention, constant care, the kind of devotion we might now reserve for precious and fragile things. A hearth surrounded by dense concentrations of stone tools suggests this was where people gathered, where they worked while staying warm, where the social and practical functions of fire merged into daily rhythm. The tools themselves tell stories: scrapers for processing hides, blades for cutting meat, points for spears that would be used in tomorrow's hunt. Each tool represents hours of work, hands chipping away at stone with patience and skill, fingers growing warm near the flames, while the mind focused on the precise angle of each strike. In some sites, researchers find what they call debitage, the waste flakes produced during tool manufacture. Thousands upon thousands of tiny stone chips scattered in patterns that reveal where people sat, how they positioned themselves relative to the fire and to each other. A concentration of flakes to the right of the hearth suggests a right-handed napper. Multiple concentrations suggest multiple people working simultaneously, perhaps teaching, perhaps simply sharing space and warmth. Charcoal fragments preserved in ash can be radiocarbon dated, giving us absolute chronology. This fire burned 28,000 years ago, this one 23,000 years ago, this one 15,000 years ago. The dates themselves are humbling. 28,000 years. That number is almost incomprehensible. It spans a length of time that includes the entire history of written language, the rise and fall of countless civilizations, all of recorded human history, and then extends back another 20,000 years beyond that. And when we map these dates, we see something remarkable. The same caves, the same shelters, used repeatedly across millennia. Not continuously, climate shifts, resource availability, and human migration patterns meant sites were occupied, abandoned, and reoccupied in cycles. But the caves themselves remained, waiting, offering the same basic shelter they had offered for countless generations. The limestone that formed these caves is hundreds of millions of years old. The caves themselves may be hundreds of thousands of years old, and for a brief span, brief in geological terms, though vast in human terms, they became containers for human life, human struggle, human warmth. In southern France, in a cave system called Grotte du Renne, excavations revealed something particularly moving. Beneath the current ground surface, beneath centuries of sediment, they found a Paleolithic floor, the actual surface people walked on 30,000 years ago. And on that floor, perfectly preserved in the specific conditions of the cave, were footprints, not many, just a few, pressed into clay that was soft when stepped on, that hardened over time, that was eventually buried and protected by sediment accumulation. The discovery was accidental, as so many profound archaeological finds are. A team member noticed an unusual depression in the exposed sediment layer. Further careful excavation revealed the unmistakable impression of toes, the ball of a foot, the slight pressure gradient that indicated weight distribution during walking. The footprints are small. A child's feet, perhaps 8 or 9 years old based on size analysis. The child walked from the cave entrance toward the back, where a hearth would have burned. Then returned. The stride shows no signs of distress, just ordinary walking, a child moving through familiar space. The gait analysis suggests confidence, no hesitation, no stumbling. This child knew this space intimately, had walked this path countless times before. The stride length is consistent, the foot placement sure, this was home. This child has been dead for 30,000 years, the footprints remain. When researchers published these findings, they included careful measurements, scientific analysis, discussion of deposition processes, and preservation conditions. They discussed the clay composition that allowed the prints to preserve. They analyzed the sediment stratigraphy that determined when the prints were covered. They employed three-dimensional laser scanning to create precise digital models. But they also included photographs, and anyone who looks at those photographs sees not data, but humanity. A child walking home, a child moving toward warmth, a child who lived and played, and probably complained about chores and maybe wondered about the stars. These footprints were left during winter. We know because the cave shows clear seasonal occupation patterns, used intensively during cold months, largely abandoned during summer when the clan would have moved to open-air camps at lower elevations. The seasonal pattern is evident in the faunal remains. Winter-killed animals show different skeletal markers than summer-killed ones. Reindeer antlers found in the cave are in a state of development that occurs only during cold months. The plant remains, what few have survived, are from species that grow or were harvested in autumn and early winter. So this child walked across this floor during a winter 30,000 years ago, walked toward a fire that someone like Kaura kept burning, walked through smoke and cold and the communal warmth of clan life. then walked out of time entirely, leaving only these small impressions in clay. The research team debated how to preserve the footprints. They could not leave them exposed. Air and humidity changes would destroy them within years. They considered removing the entire section of floor, but the risk of damage during transport was too great. Eventually, they created detailed casts and digital models, then carefully reburied the original prints under protective layers of sediment. So the footprints remain in the cave in darkness, preserved as they have been for 30 millennia. Only the casts and photographs remain accessible to us, copies of copies, shadows of presence. Yet somehow, even as shadows, they testify. They say, "I was real, I walked here, I lived." In multiple Paleolithic sites across Europe, archaeologists have found something puzzling: the bones of wolves and dogs intermingled with human remains. Not as food, the bones show no butchery marks, no evidence of having been processed for meat or marrow. The bones are intact or broken only in ways consistent with natural decay and geological pressure. No one split these bones to extract marrow. No one carved these carcasses for meat. Instead, they appear to have died naturally and been left where they fell, or been deliberately placed in positions that suggest respect, even care. At a site in the Czech Republic called Předmostí, excavators found the remains of over 30 mammoth hunters buried together, along with the complete skeletons of several canids, animals that may have been early domesticated dogs or wolves in the process of becoming dogs. The burial is extraordinary in its scale and evident planning. The human bodies were arranged in deliberate patterns. Many wore ornaments, carved ivory beads, fox-tooth pendants, shells that must have been traded from regions hundreds of kilometers away. The burial required immense labor, excavating the frozen ground, positioning the bodies, covering them with earth and stones. And among these carefully interred humans with equal care were the canids. The question that haunts researchers: what was the relationship between these humans and these animals? The traditional narrative suggests early dog domestication began around 15,000 years ago, when wolves first began scavenging near human settlements, gradually adapting to human presence over generations until a symbiotic relationship developed. The story goes that wolves with less fear and more tolerance for humans had better access to human food waste. These wolves survived better, reproduced more successfully, and gradually, over thousands of years, a separate population emerged, one that was genetically and behaviorally distinct from wild wolves. These were the first dogs, but the Předmostí findings are dated to 27,000 years ago, more than 10,000 years before the accepted domestication timeline. So what were wolves doing buried with humans? Why were they treated with apparent reverence rather than consumed as food? One theory, soft and speculative but hauntingly plausible, is that humans and wolves formed temporary cold-weather alliances. Wolves generate significant body heat. They are social animals comfortable sleeping in close contact with pack members. A wolf's body temperature is similar to a human's, around 38–39 degrees Celsius. Their thick fur provides insulation. A sleeping wolf is essentially a warm, breathing furnace. They are also intelligent enough to recognize mutual benefit. Humans have fire and occasionally extra food. Wolves have warmth and acute senses for detecting danger. Wolves can hear and smell with acuity that far exceeds human capabilities. A wolf can detect the approach of a predator, a cave lion, a cave bear, long before humans would notice anything amiss. In the darkness of a Paleolithic winter night, that early warning system could mean the difference between survival and death. During the worst winters, when survival margins were razor-thin, might desperate humans have allowed wolves into their shelters? Might they have shared sleeping spaces, each species providing what the other lacked? The archaeological evidence neither confirms nor denies this possibility. The bones are simply there, together, silent in their arrangement. But researchers have noted something intriguing. In sites where wolf bones appear near human hearths, the wolves tend to be older individuals, not the prime-age animals you would select for eating, but aged pack members who might have been less threatening, less competitive, more tolerant of human proximity. Wolf social structure is complex and sometimes brutal. Older wolves who lose status may be driven from the pack. They become solitary, vulnerable, desperate. An old wolf without a pack in winter is a dying wolf. But an old wolf is also less dangerous. Its teeth are worn, its strength diminished, its aggression tempered by age and exhaustion. An old wolf seeking shelter and warmth might accept human proximity in ways a young, vigorous wolf never would. Perhaps in the deepest cold, a kind of truce existed, an understanding between species that transcended normal predator-prey or competitor relationships. Perhaps old wolves, outcasts from their packs, found refuge in human caves, and perhaps humans, recognizing the warmth and companionship these animals offered, allowed them to stay. Some researchers have proposed an even more specific scenario, that humans specifically sought out and rescued old or injured wolves, understanding that a wolf kept alive through winter would remain grateful and attached, that the relationship was not passive acceptance but active cultivation. We will likely never know with certainty. The boundary between wolf and dog, between wild animal and companion, is blurred in these ancient contexts. Behavior leaves few traces in the archaeological record, but the bones remain. Together, suggesting connection, dependency, some form of relationship that mattered enough that death did not separate them. In the frozen darkness of Paleolithic winter, perhaps the lines between human and animal softened. Perhaps warmth was warmth, regardless of its source. Perhaps survival created unlikely alliances that modern categories cannot quite capture. The mystery persists, preserved in bone, waiting in the earth. And perhaps that mystery itself is important. Perhaps not everything from the past should be resolved into clear categories and definitive explanations. Perhaps some things should remain suggestions, possibilities, intimations of relationships we can feel but not fully articulate. The wolves and the humans buried together. That fact alone is enough. On the walls of certain caves, particularly in the Pyrenees region between France and Spain, researchers have found marks that defy easy explanation. These are not the famous paintings, the horses and bison and aurochs rendered in ochre and charcoal, the hand stencils, the geometric patterns. Those are remarkable, but their purpose, while debated, falls within recognizable artistic or ritual categories. No, these marks are different, simpler, stranger. Above ancient hearths, on cave walls directly in the path of rising smoke, there are dots, lines, streaks of soot arranged in patterns that seem almost deliberate but resist clear interpretation. At first, researchers assumed these were accidental, just smoke staining, the natural result of fires burning for thousands of years in enclosed spaces. Smoke rises, deposits carbon on whatever surfaces it encounters, and over time, these deposits accumulate into dark stains, natural, random, meaningless. But closer analysis revealed something unexpected. The patterns show evidence of intentionality. The dots are relatively evenly spaced, not perfectly. Paleolithic people had no rulers or measuring devices, but with a consistency that suggests deliberate placement. The lines follow consistent angles, and the placement, always directly above hearths, at heights that would require someone to stand and reach upward deliberately, suggests these were not random accumulations but created marks. To create these marks, someone would have had to take charcoal or soot-covered fingers and press them deliberately against the wall, again and again, following some pattern or plan or impulse that made sense to them but remains opaque to us. Some researchers speculate these might be counting systems, tally marks for something, days, deaths, successful hunts. But if so, what are they counting? And why place these records in smoke-blackened areas where they would be difficult to see? The visibility question is particularly puzzling. In the flickering light of a Paleolithic hearth, these marks would have been nearly invisible, dark soot on dark stone, obscured by rising smoke. To see them clearly, you would need to extinguish the fire and examine the wall in daylight or by torchlight. Why create marks that are deliberately difficult to perceive? Another theory proposes ritual significance. Perhaps the act of marking above the fire was itself meaningful. Perhaps smoke was understood as a medium of communication, rising from the human world towards something beyond, carrying messages or prayers or simple acknowledgements of existence. In several caves, the soot patterns form what appear to be representations of flames themselves, rising, branching, flowing upward, as if someone painted fire with fire, used smoke to draw smoke. This seems almost poetic, documenting the very thing that made survival possible, creating permanent marks from the ephemeral process of burning, taking something transient, smoke, heat, flame, and fixing it in stone, making it permanent, giving it a kind of immortality. But we cannot know. The people who made these marks left no explanation. The patterns simply exist, dark against stone, preserved by the same conditions that destroyed so much else. In one cave in northern Spain, researchers found something particularly enigmatic. A series of soot dots above a hearth, 28 in total, arranged in a curved line that suggests deliberate counting. 28, which happens to be the approximate length of a lunar cycle, which also happens to be the approximate length of a menstrual cycle. Could these dots represent lunar observation, menstrual tracking, pure coincidence? The evidence is insufficient to conclude anything definitively. But the possibility lingers. The idea that someone, perhaps a woman, sat by the fire night after night, marking time in a way that made sense to her, creating a calendar or record or simply a pattern that pleased her. Menstrual tracking would have had practical importance in Paleolithic societies. Understanding fertility cycles would have been valuable information, particularly in small populations where every birth mattered. A woman who could predict her fertile periods had knowledge that affected not just her own life, but the survival of her entire community. But perhaps the marks mean nothing of the sort. Perhaps they are aesthetic, someone who found beauty in pattern and repetition, who enjoyed the act of creation for its own sake. Perhaps they are playful, a child reaching up to make marks while adults worked nearby, creating something simply because they could. Or perhaps they are deeply significant in ways we cannot begin to reconstruct. Perhaps they connected to beliefs or practices or ways of understanding the world that are completely foreign to modern thinking. Smoke rises, marks remain, and we, looking back across 25,000 years, try to read meaning into darkness. The humility required in this work is profound. We have sophisticated tools, advanced analytical techniques, decades of accumulated research, and still we stand before these simple marks and can only speculate. The marks are there, that is certain. Everything else is interpretation. In certain Paleolithic sites, particularly in Russia and Eastern Europe, archaeologists have discovered burials that follow a peculiar pattern, bodies interred beneath or immediately beside hearths. Not in the hearths themselves, the bodies were not cremated, but positioned so that they rested under the very spots where fires once burned, where ash accumulated, where warmth pooled during life. These burials required significant effort. To place a body beneath a hearth, the hearth must be dismantled, the earth excavated, the body positioned, and then the hearth rebuilt on top. This is not casual disposal. This is deliberate, meaningful placement that required communal labor, planning, and intention. The most famous example comes from Sungir, a site in Russia dated to approximately 34,000 years ago. Here, researchers found multiple burials, including a particularly striking one. Two children, buried together, surrounded by thousands of ivory beads that once adorned elaborate clothing. The burial pit was located directly beneath what had been a major hearth. The beads alone represent extraordinary investment. Each bead was carved from mammoth ivory, a difficult material to work. Each required hours of labor, cutting, drilling, polishing. The children were adorned with approximately 10,000 beads between them. At an estimated rate of 1 hour per bead, this represents 10,000 hours of work. Even if multiple people worked simultaneously, this represents months of sustained labor. The children were not simply placed in the ground, they were dressed, decorated, honored. And then the community chose to rebuild their fire, their source of warmth, their center of social life, directly over these bodies. What does this mean? One interpretation suggests belief in a connection between warmth and the afterlife. Perhaps fire was understood not just as practical heat, but as a spiritual force. Perhaps placing the dead beneath hearths was a way of ensuring they remained warm in whatever existence followed death. The logic has a certain emotional resonance. In life, fire kept you warm. In death, may you rest beneath eternal flame. This interpretation gains some support from burial practices documented in other cultures and time periods. Many human societies have believed that the dead experience cold, that they need protection and comfort in the afterlife just as they did in life. The practice of placing grave goods, clothes, tools, food, reflects this concern. But Paleolithic people did not have writing, did not leave clear records of their beliefs. We can only infer from what they did, not what they thought. Another interpretation is more pragmatic, but no less meaningful. Hearths were the center of community life. By burying significant individuals beneath these locations, the community ensured their continued presence. Every fire lit on that spot became an act of remembrance. Every meal cooked, every tool made, every evening spent in warmth occurred in the literal presence of the ancestors. The dead were not separated from the living. They were foundational, grounding, always there beneath the flames that sustained those who remained. This practice did not persist in all communities or all time periods. It appears in specific regions during specific eras, then vanishes from the archaeological record. But while it lasted, it created something profound, a physical merging of the living and the dead, of warmth and memory, of present survival and past sacrifice. Imagine sleeping near a hearth, knowing that beneath the flames, beneath the ash and stone, someone you loved rests in the earth, someone who once sat where you sit, who once felt the same warmth you feel now. Does the fire burn differently with such knowledge? Does its warmth carry additional meaning? We cannot ask the people who practiced these burials, but we can observe what they left behind, evidence of care, of continuity, of a worldview in which the boundaries between life and death were not absolute walls but permeable membranes. The ash layers above these burials often show continuous use spanning decades. The hearths were maintained, rebuilt, used year after year. The communities returned to these sites, lit fires on the same spots, perhaps because the location offered practical advantages, good shelter, water access, strategic positioning, or perhaps because the dead were there. And leaving them meant breaking connection. And connection, even to those who had passed beyond speech and breath, mattered more than convenience. In some cases, researchers can trace the biography of a hearth, first use as simple campfire, gradual development into maintained feature, eventual burial beneath it, continued use for decades afterward, final abandonment when the community moved or died out. Each stage is legible in the stratigraphy, the layering of ash and soil and stone. These biographies have a narrative quality. They tell stories of places that mattered, of decisions made and sustained across generations, of memory preserved not in words, but in repetitive action. The most moving aspect might be the final abandonment. The last fire lit on these spots by people who did not know they were lighting the last fire, who expected to return, who left thinking they would be back next winter. But they never came back, and the hearths went cold, and the ash layers stopped accumulating, and slowly, over centuries, soil covered everything, and the site became just another unremarkable patch of ground. Until archaeologists arrived with their careful methods and patient excavation and brought it all back into light. If you could see a map of Paleolithic Europe with every discovered hearth marked, you would see something remarkable. Density. Every few kilometers, sometimes every few hundred meters along river valleys and coastal plains, there are sites where humans once made fire, where ash accumulated, where survival was negotiated night by night, season by season. This density speaks to the fragility of Paleolithic existence. You could not travel far without needing shelter, could not survive many nights without fire. The landscape was dotted with places of refuge, each one a small pocket of warmth in an immense cold. The distances are instructive. A day's travel in winter for a group moving with children and elders, with supplies and tools, might cover only a few kilometers. Terrain was difficult. No roads, no cleared paths, just wilderness. Snow, ice, frozen rivers to cross, hills to climb. Every evening required fire. Every night required shelter. The network of known camps and caves formed a kind of infrastructure as essential to survival as roads and bridges would be to later civilizations. But the pattern also speaks to continuity. The same caves, the same rock shelters, the same advantageous locations were used over and over across millennia. Not by the same people, individual lifespans were short and populations were mobile, but by successive groups who recognized what made a place suitable: protection from wind, proximity to water, access to game routes, adequate drainage. How was this knowledge transmitted? How did people learn which caves were good, which shelters were reliable? Some knowledge was probably personal experience. You tried a cave, it worked well, you remembered and returned. But some must have been transmitted socially. Elders telling younger people there is a good cave 3 days north, near the river bend where the limestone cliffs are. You will know it by the distinctive rock formation at the entrance. This kind of knowledge transmission requires language, memory, and trust. It requires a social world complex enough to accumulate and share information across generations. Good shelter was rare, good shelter was precious, and knowledge of where to find it was survival information passed from generation to generation. In this way, the landscape itself became a text, a record of accumulated human experience, written in the placement of hearths, in the density of stone tools, in the layers of occupation and abandonment. Each hearth discovered today is a word in this text, a small voice from the past saying, "We were here. We were cold. We made fire. We survived." The repetition is almost liturgical. The same actions, the same solutions, the same desperate, persistent human effort to push back against darkness and cold. Sometimes archaeologists find hearths that were clearly unsuccessful, abandoned after a single use, surrounded by minimal debris, suggesting the occupants did not stay long. Perhaps the shelter was inadequate, perhaps game was too scarce, perhaps illness or accident forced them to move. These failed hearths are as meaningful as the successful ones. They represent attempts, hopes, efforts that did not work out but were nevertheless made. One site in Germany shows evidence of a hearth that was lit, used for perhaps 1 or 2 nights, and then abandoned. The ash layer is thin. The surrounding debris is minimal, just a few flakes of worked stone, a broken blade, some charred bone fragments from a small meal. Something went wrong. We cannot know what. But the hearth itself testifies to the attempt. Someone arrived at this spot, thought it would work, made fire, tried to establish camp, and then left. moved on, sought better conditions elsewhere. The optimism required to try again after failure is remarkable. To have a plan not work out, to face disappointment and discomfort, and still move forward, still seek the next shelter, still believe that survival is possible, this is not a small thing. Other hearths show signs of success. Deep ash accumulations, evidence of tool manufacturing and food processing, burials nearby suggesting people lived long enough to die of natural causes rather than immediate catastrophe. Success and failure preserved in ash. And throughout it all, the constancy of fire. Humans in the Paleolithic had fire, had mastered it, maintained it, built their entire survival strategy around it for tens of thousands of years before the period we have been exploring. Fire was not new to them. It was ancient, foundational, so thoroughly integrated into human life that existence without it was unthinkable. The earliest controlled use of fire by human ancestors dates back hundreds of thousands of years, possibly more than 1 million years. By the Paleolithic period we have been discussing, fire use was not innovative. It was traditional. It was how things had always been done. Yet it required constant attention, constant care, constant sacrifice of time and resources and sleep. This is perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Paleolithic fire use. Its demands never diminished. No matter how many generations had tended flames before you, no matter how routine the process became, fire never became automatic. It always required human effort, always required someone to wake in darkness, always required someone to care. And they did care. Across hundreds of generations, across thousands of winters, someone always cared enough to keep the flame alive. The evidence is there, buried in European soil, waiting to be uncovered. Every hearth is a testament. Every ash layer is proof. Every charcoal fragment is a small piece of a larger story about human persistence, human ingenuity, human tenderness. We find these traces and we analyze them with scientific rigor. Dating methods and spatial analysis and chemical signatures. This is necessary. This is how we learn. But sometimes, if we are honest, we must also simply sit with what we have found, must acknowledge that these blackened stones and ash layers represent human lives, real people, real cold, real fear, real hope. They made fire in darkness. They shared warmth with each other and perhaps with wolves. They marked smoke on cave walls for reasons we cannot fully understand. They buried their dead beneath hearths, ensuring that warmth and memory intertwined forever. And in doing so, they became us, or we became them. The distinction barely matters. The capacity for care that kept Paleolithic fires burning is the same capacity that allows us today to pause and remember them, to reconstruct their lives, to honor their struggle. When an archaeologist carefully brushes ash from a 25,000-year-old hearth, when they collect charcoal samples for dating, when they map the distribution of artifacts around the fire site, these are acts of care. Different from the care that kept the original fire burning, but related, connected by the same fundamental human impulse to attend, to preserve, to understand, to remember. Every fire we light, in some sense, contains a spark of their fire. Every warmth we feel echoes the warmth they fought so hard to maintain. This is not metaphor. The knowledge of how to make fire, how to maintain it, how to use it effectively, this knowledge was passed from person to person, generation to generation, in an unbroken chain stretching from the Paleolithic to the present day. Someone taught you how fire works. Perhaps not explicitly, perhaps you learned by observation, by experiment, by growing up in a world where fire is common and controlled, but you learned. And that learning connects you to every person who ever learned to make fire, all the way back to the first humans who mastered this skill. The flame is continuous, passed hand to hand, generation to generation, burning still. In a very real sense, the fires we light today are the same fire that burned In Paleolithic caves, the chemistry is identical: combustion of carbon-based fuel in the presence of oxygen, releasing energy as heat and light. The human relationship to that fire, the need for its warmth, the fear of its absence, the care required to maintain it, these two are continuous. We have changed much about how we relate to fire. We have central heating, electric lights, gas stoves. For most people in the developed world, fire is optional: a candle for ambiance, a campfire for recreation. The stakes are no longer life and death, but the knowledge persists, and somewhere in us perhaps the old recognition persists too, the understanding that fire is precious, that warmth is survival, that someone must care. When we gather around fires today, at campsites, at beach bonfires, at fireplaces during holidays, we are reenacting something ancient. We are doing what our ancestors did, and perhaps in some small way, we are remembering them. The archaeologists who study these sites often speak of feeling a sense of presence, of connection. They are scientists trained in rigorous methodology, skeptical of romanticism. But still they report this feeling, that the people who left these traces are somehow still present in them. A hearth is not just an object. It is an action frozen in time. Someone gathered fuel, someone arranged stones, someone lit a flame and kept it burning. All of that effort, that intention, that care, it remains preserved in ash and stone. To study these sites is to touch, however indirectly, the lives of people who have been dead for tens of thousands of years, to reconstruct their actions, to understand their choices, to honor their persistence. This work matters, not because it changes how we live today, though understanding our past does shape how we think about our present and future, but because these people deserve to be remembered, their struggles deserve recognition, their successes deserve celebration. They survived impossible conditions. They endured winters that would kill us in days. They maintained complex social structures, created art, developed technologies, raised children, buried their dead with honor. They were fully human as we are, and their humanity demands acknowledgement. Every hearth excavated is a form of that acknowledgement. Every careful analysis is a statement. You mattered. Your life had meaning. We remember. And perhaps in the end, that is what the hearths themselves were always about. Not just warmth, though warmth was essential. Not just survival, though survival was the immediate need, but connection, continuity, the affirmation that we are not alone in the dark. The Paleolithic people who gathered around fires knew they were part of something larger than themselves. They knew others had sat where they sat, had warmed themselves at similar fires, had faced similar challenges. And they knew, or at least hoped, that others would come after them, that the fires would continue to burn, that the knowledge would be passed on, that the struggle would not end in darkness but in continuation. They were right. We are here. We remember them. The fire still burns, and as long as we remember, as long as we honor their persistence, as long as we acknowledge the common humanity that connects us across vast gulfs of time, the flame remains continuous, burning through the ages, warming us still, lighting the way forward by reminding us of the depths from which we have come. The ash layers in European caves are more than archaeological evidence. They are testimony, they are witness, they are proof that humans can endure, can persist, can care for one another, even in the most desperate circumstances. And that testimony matters today, perhaps more than ever. We face our own challenges now, different challenges, but challenges nonetheless. Climate change, social fragmentation, questions about meaning and purpose in an increasingly complex world. The Paleolithic hearths do not offer solutions to these modern problems, but they offer something else, evidence of human resilience, proof that our ancestors faced unimaginable hardship and survived, not just survived, thrived enough to create art, to develop culture, to care for one another with a tenderness that still moves us across the millennia. That matters. That knowledge of what humans are capable of endurance, of care, of persistence in the face of overwhelming odds, that is not a small thing to carry forward. There is a particular beauty in stratigraphy, in the way Earth preserves time in layers. Each layer represents a period, a season, a year, a generation. The deepest layers are oldest, the surface layers are most recent, and between them, compressed into darkness, lies history. Archaeologists read these layers like pages in a book. A layer of ash speaks of fire, a layer of clay speaks of flooding, a layer containing pollen grains from specific plant species speaks of climate conditions, of what was growing nearby, of what season it might have been. In Paleolithic cave sites, the stratigraphy is often complex. Layers of human occupation alternate with layers of natural deposition, sediment washed in by rain, dust blown in by wind, debris from rockfalls. Each occupation layer tells a story. Here, people lived for a season or two, then they left. Nature reclaimed the space, covering their traces with new sediment. Then, perhaps years later, perhaps generations later, people returned, built fires on the same spot, left new traces. The layers accumulate. Time becomes visible, tangible, something you can point to and say, this happened, then this, then this. Some caves have stratigraphic sequences spanning tens of thousands of years. The deepest excavations reveal hearths from the early Paleolithic. Above them, separated by layers of sterile sediment, are hearths from the Middle Paleolithic. Above those, more layers, more hearths, more evidence of human presence. Reading these sequences requires both technical skill and imagination, the skill to identify and distinguish layers, to recognize boundaries, to understand deposition processes, the imagination to see past the compressed earth to the events it represents, real fires burning, real people gathering warmth, real lives being lived. One of the most haunting aspects of these stratigraphic sequences is what they reveal about interruption and return. A site will show intensive occupation, thick ash layers, abundant artifacts, clear evidence of sustained human presence. Then nothing, a gap in the sequence, sterile layers accumulating, perhaps for centuries. What happened? Did the climate shift, making the area uninhabitable? Did the game populations move, forcing people to follow? Did conflict or disease reduce the population? Did people simply decide to go elsewhere? We rarely know. The Earth records presence. It also records absence, but it does not record reasons. Then, after the gap, occupation resumes. New hearths appear in the stratigraphy, new artifacts, new evidence that people found this place, recognized its value, and chose to use it. The continuity across these gaps is remarkable. The later occupants often use the same areas within the cave, build hearths in the same locations. Even when centuries separate them from the previous inhabitants, they make similar choices. This suggests something about human perception of space. Certain locations within a cave offer advantages: good air circulation, protection from dripping water, proximity to the entrance for light, while still being sheltered from wind. These advantages are not cultural, they are physical facts of the space. Different human groups, separated by time, independently recognize these facts and make similar choices. The hearths align vertically through the stratigraphy, one above the other, separated by layers of time but connected by logic. There is something almost comforting in this. Across vast spans of time, across cultural changes we cannot fully reconstruct, human beings remain recognizably human. They assess their environment, identify the best spots, make practical choices. The ash layers, when analyzed, reveal seasonal patterns. Some hearths contain only certain types of wood, species that would have been available in winter. Others contain plant remains from spring or autumn. Some contain bones from animals that migrate seasonally. By analyzing these contents, archaeologists can determine not just when a hearth was used in absolute terms, through radiocarbon dating, but what time of year it was used. The patterns that emerge tell stories of seasonal rounds, predictable movements through the landscape, following resources, returning to favored sites at appropriate times of year. Winter sites tend to be caves and rock shelters, places offering maximum protection from cold and wind. Summer sites are more often open-air camps near rivers or in valleys where game would congregate. This seasonal pattern represents sophisticated knowledge of the landscape and its resources. It represents planning, knowing you will need shelter in 6 months and remembering where to find it. It represents memory each year, making the journey back to the same winter caves because you know they work. And it represents social cohesion. These movements required coordination. Everyone in the group had to agree on when to move, where to go. Elders had to share their knowledge of where the good sites were. Younger people had to learn and remember. The ash layers preserve evidence of this coordination. They show groups returning to the same sites year after year. They show knowledge being transmitted across generations. And they show, perhaps most powerfully, that humans succeeded, that the strategy worked, that people survived. Consider the cumulative weight of what these hearths represent. Each fire, each night of warmth, each season of survival. These were not given, they were earned through effort, through knowledge, through cooperation, through sheer stubborn persistence. A single winter represents dozens of fires. Each fire represents fuel gathered, wood collected, dried, stored. Each fire represents tending, someone staying awake, adding fuel, adjusting logs to maintain optimal burning. Multiply one winter by a lifetime. Multiply one lifetime by a clan. Multiply one clan by the thousands of clans that inhabited Paleolithic Europe over tens of thousands of years. The number of fires is incalculable. The amount of human effort they represent is beyond comprehension. And yet every single one of those fires was necessary. Every single one represented the difference between life and death. The weight of this, the sheer accumulation of effort, the relentless need, the impossibility of rest, is almost crushing to contemplate. And yet they did it, generation after generation, through all the worst winters, through climate shifts and catastrophes we can barely imagine. Through personal tragedies and communal challenges, they kept the fires burning. What does this tell us about human nature? It tells us we are capable of sustained effort in pursuit of survival, that we can endure monotony, repetition, endless cycles of the same essential tasks if those tasks are necessary. It tells us we are capable of care that extends beyond ourselves. The fire tenders were not only keeping themselves warm, they were keeping their children warm, their elders warm, their clanmates warm. The effort was communal, the benefit was shared. It tells us we are capable of maintaining knowledge across generations. Fire tending is a learned skill. Someone had to teach it. Someone had to demonstrate which wood burns best, how to arrange stones for heat reflection, how to judge when to add fuel. This teaching required patience, attention, investment in the next generation's survival. And it tells us we are capable of hope. You do not tend a fire if you believe the night will never end. You do not gather fuel for tomorrow if you believe tomorrow will not come. You do not teach children how to make fire if you believe they have no future. Every hearth is an act of hope, an assertion that survival is possible, that warmth can be maintained, that the darkness, however deep, is not final. The Paleolithic winters were dark indeed, longer nights than we experience today, in latitudes where winter sun barely climbs above the horizon, cold that modern humans with our heated homes and insulated clothing can barely imagine. Danger from predators that no longer exist, cave lions, cave bears, massive hyenas that could crush bone. And yet, In that darkness and cold and danger, humans made fire, made warmth, made space where life could continue. The hearths testify to this. Each one is a small victory. Each one says, we did not yield, we did not give up, we persisted. And the accumulation of these small victories preserved in ash becomes something larger than any individual triumph. It becomes proof of what humans are, what we have always been, not superhuman, not invulnerable, but persistent, capable, caring, able to endure. There is something humbling about archaeological evidence. It is always incomplete, always fragmentary, always requiring interpretation. We have ash, we have stones, we have bones and charcoal and occasional traces of organic materials preserved under extraordinary conditions. We do not have voices, we do not have explanations, we do not have the internal lives of the people who left these traces. And yet from these fragments we attempt to reconstruct entire worlds. We infer behavior from spatial patterns. We deduce belief systems from burial practices. We imagine social structures from the distribution of resources. This work requires both rigorous science and imaginative empathy. The science tells us what is present, what can be measured, what can be dated and analyzed. The empathy allows us to move from those measurements to human meaning. The danger, always, is over-interpretation, seeing patterns that are not there, projecting our own assumptions and values onto people who may have thought completely differently. Good archaeology requires humility. It requires acknowledging uncertainty. It requires saying we do not know as often as we have evidence for. But it also requires commitment to trying, to making the best possible interpretations based on available evidence, to reconstructing as much as can be responsibly reconstructed, because these people deserve that effort. They deserve to be remembered as fully as possible. Even if our understanding is partial, even if we get things wrong, the attempt itself is a form of respect. The hearths are generous evidence. They preserve more than many other types of archaeological features. The ash layers contain microscopic traces that reveal diet, climate, seasonality. The stones retain thermal signatures that indicate fire temperatures. The spatial arrangements reveal social organization. But they also remain, in crucial ways, silent. They tell us what people did. They rarely tell us why. A hearth with a burial beneath it. We see the action. Dismantling, excavating, burying, rebuilding. We can describe this process with precision. But the meaning, that requires inference, speculation, imagining what those actions meant to the people who performed them. We might be completely wrong. Our interpretations might say more about us than about them, but we have to try. Because the alternative, treating these traces as mere data points, stripping away all human meaning, reducing lives to statistics, that seems like a greater betrayal. So we analyze with rigor, and we interpret with care, and we acknowledge our limitations, and we remember that behind every ash layer, every hearthstone, every charcoal fragment, there were real people, living, breathing, feeling human beings who struggled and hoped and cared. That is not romantic sentimentality. That is basic respect for human dignity across time. Fire is demanding. It requires constant attention, constant care. It offers nothing automatically. Every moment of warmth must be earned. This is perhaps fire's most important lesson. Survival is not passive. Security is not guaranteed. Warmth must be maintained through effort, through vigilance, through work that never ends. The Paleolithic people who tended these hearths understood this in their bones. They could not afford to forget. A neglected fire was a deadly fire, not because it might spread, but because it might die, and its death might mean their own. This creates a particular relationship to resources. Fuel is precious. Wood must be gathered, dried, stored. You cannot wait until you need it to start looking for it. You must plan ahead, must accumulate reserves, must think about tomorrow's fire today. This forward thinking, this planning for future needs, is a sophisticated cognitive skill. It requires imagining future states, remembering past patterns, understanding causation. If I do not gather wood today, I will be cold tomorrow. The hearths preserve evidence of this planning. Storage areas near hearths contain stockpiled fuel. Work areas show evidence of wood processing, breaking branches to appropriate sizes, removing wet bark, selecting the best pieces for overnight burning. None of this is accidental. All of it represents conscious decision-making, practical knowledge applied to immediate problems. Fire also teaches interdependence. One person can maintain a fire, but a group does it better. Different people can take shifts. Some can gather fuel while others tend the flame. Children can be taught to help with simple tasks, gradually learning the full skill set they will need as adults. The hearths, in their spatial arrangements, suggest this communal activity. Multiple work areas around a central fire. Sleeping spaces positioned to benefit from warmth. The entire layout suggests shared purpose, coordinated activity, division of labor. This is social complexity, this is culture, not in the sense of art or ritual, but in the fundamental sense of learned, shared behavior patterns that allow groups to function effectively. And fire teaches one more thing, perhaps the most important: care matters. You cannot maintain a fire without caring about it, cannot keep it burning through inattention or indifference. The fire demands your care and attention, or it dies. This creates a practice of care, a habit of attention, a learned capacity to notice what needs to be done and to do it, even when tired, even when it would be easier not to. That capacity, developed through tending fire, likely extended to other domains. Caring for children requires the same attention. Caring for the elderly or injured requires the same persistence. Caring for the group requires the same willingness to put immediate personal comfort aside for long-term collective benefit. The hearths, then, are not just about fire. They are about what fire taught, about the capacities it developed, about the social bonds it strengthened. Every night spent keeping watch over a fire was a night spent practicing care, practicing vigilance, practicing the skills and attitudes that made human society possible. The warmth was necessary, but perhaps the practice of caring, the habit of attention, the learned capacity to persist in necessary tasks, perhaps that was equally important to survival. The fire burned, the clan survived, and in surviving they learned how to care for one another, learned it in the most visceral way possible through the daily, nightly, endless work of keeping warm. We began with ash and stone, with blackened earth compressed by millennia, with the traces of fires that burned out long before recorded history began. And from those traces we have reconstructed something of what those fires meant, the effort they required, the lives they sustained, the care they represented. But perhaps the most important thing to understand is that the story is not finished. The fires that burned in Paleolithic caves were not isolated events. They were part of a continuous chain of fire-making and fire-tending that extends from the deep past to the present moment. You know how to make fire. If you do not know the specific technique, how to strike flint, how to use friction, how to focus sunlight, you at least understand the principle. You know that fire is possible, that it can be controlled, that it serves human purposes. This knowledge came from somewhere. It was passed to you through countless generations, from the first humans who mastered this skill. The chain is unbroken, and the need, the fundamental human need for warmth, for light, for the transformative power of fire, that need persists too. We express it differently now. We have technologies that would seem like magic to Paleolithic people. We can create warmth without visible flame, light without burning, cook food without smoke. But underneath the technology, the need is the same. and the human capacity that meets that need, the capacity for care, for planning, for sustained effort, for cooperation, that remains unchanged. The Paleolithic hearths remind us who we are, what we come from, what we are capable of. They remind us that humans have always been capable of remarkable persistence, that we have survived conditions that should have destroyed us, that we have done so not through individual strength, but through collective care. The fires burned because people made them burn, because someone cared enough to gather fuel, because someone stayed awake through the darkest hours, because someone taught the next generation what they needed to know. That caring, that persistent, unglamorous, essential work of maintaining what matters, that is what survival has always required. And it is what survival still requires. We face different challenges now, but we face them with the same human capacities that kept Paleolithic fires burning, the same ability to endure, the same willingness to care, the same determination to persist. The hearths wait in darkness buried beneath European soil, but they are not truly dark. They glow still with the warmth of human effort, with the light of human care, with the proof of human resilience. And when archaeologists uncover them, when they carefully document the ash layers and analyze the charcoal and reconstruct the lives they represent, that is a form of fire tending too, keeping the memory alive, maintaining the connection, ensuring that those ancient efforts are not forgotten. The flame is passed hand to hand, generation to generation, and it burns still. In the work of archaeologists who uncover and honor these sites, in the knowledge we carry about our own history, in the capacity for care that we inherited from ancestors who survived impossible winters. The Paleolithic fires were extinguished long ago, their ash is cold, their stones are scattered, but their light persists. In our knowledge of who we are, in our understanding of what humans can endure, in our recognition that we are connected across vast gulfs of time to everyone who has ever struggled to survive. The hearths testify, the ash preserves, the stones remember, and we, looking back across 30,000 years of winter, see our own faces reflected in the flames our ancestors kept burning. We are them, they are us. The fire continues, forever burning, forever warm, forever human. Let us turn now to a truth that may seem uncomfortable, but which appears consistently in the archaeological record, even in the Paleolithic, even among small bands of humans struggling at the edge of survival. Inequality existed. Not in the dramatic forms we recognize from later civilizations, no palaces, no formal class systems, no written laws enforcing hierarchy, but in subtler patterns that nonetheless shaped who suffered more and who suffered less during the brutal months of winter. Warmth, always, was the measure of privilege. In excavations across Europe, researchers have identified differences in how individuals were buried. Some graves are simple, a body in earth, perhaps a hide wrapping, minimal goods. Others are elaborate, adorned with thousands of beads, surrounded by tools and ornaments, positioned in ways that required significant communal effort. These differences reflect social status. They must. A community struggling to survive does not invest hundreds of hours crafting ivory beads for someone who held no importance, no special role, no valued position. But what created these hierarchies in a world without accumulated wealth, without agricultural surplus, without cities or states? What determined who received more and who received less? The answer, emerging from careful analysis of site layouts and artifact distributions, seems to be knowledge, skill, and perceived spiritual power. Those who understood fire most deeply, how to create it from nothing, how to maintain it through impossible conditions, held authority. Those who knew the landscape, where game migrated, where plants could be found even in winter, where safe shelter existed, held power. Those who could heal or were believed to communicate with forces beyond human understanding received deference and privilege. And this privilege manifested most clearly in proximity to warmth. At a site in what is now the Czech Republic, excavators found a large cave system that appeared to house multiple family groups simultaneously. Perhaps 50 to 70 people in total, unusually large for Paleolithic standards, suggesting this was a particularly favorable location. The cave had 3 hearths, 3 centers of warmth and light. Analysis of the areas around these hearths revealed distinct patterns. The central hearth, the largest, with the deepest ash accumulation, was surrounded by the highest concentration of elaborate tools, imported materials, shells from distant coasts, high-quality flint from specific quarries, and decorative items. The 2 side hearths showed more modest artifact assemblages. Still evidence of skilled work, of daily life, but noticeably less elaborate. The interpretation. The central hearth belonged to the community's leadership, the side hearths to common families. Even within a single cave, warmth was stratified. Those at the central fire had first access to the best heat, the brightest light, the most comfortable positions. Those at the peripheral fires made do with less. This pattern appears across multiple sites. Wherever researchers find evidence of larger group living, they find evidence of differential access to fire's benefits. The hierarchies were probably not rigid. Paleolithic bands were too mobile, too dependent on cooperation to sustain the kind of permanent class divisions that characterize later societies. Leadership likely shifted based on circumstance. The best hunter led during hunts, the most knowledgeable healer during illness, the most experienced elder during territorial disputes. But in winter, when survival depended on fire, those who controlled fire knowledge controlled comfort. And that control shaped social organization in ways both subtle and profound. In some Paleolithic communities, certain individuals held positions that modern anthropologists cautiously term shamanic. The evidence is indirect. We cannot observe belief systems directly in the archaeological record, but we can see patterns that suggest specialized ritual roles. At burial sites in Russia and France, researchers have found individuals interred with unusual assemblages of objects, bird bones arranged in deliberate patterns, collections of unusual stones, staffs carved with intricate designs, costumes reconstructed from thousands of carefully placed beads. These burials stand apart from typical grave goods. They suggest people whose roles in life were somehow different, set apart, special. One particularly famous burial from Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, dated to approximately 26,000 years ago, contained the remains of a woman with significant physical disabilities. Her skeleton shows evidence of developmental issues that would have made normal mobility difficult. Yet, she was buried with extraordinary care and surrounded by rich grave goods. Analysis of the surrounding area suggests she lived in a position of honor, possibly receiving care from the community rather than contributing labor in traditional ways. The interpretation, her value came from something other than physical contribution. Perhaps she was believed to possess special knowledge. Perhaps disability was interpreted as a sign of spiritual sensitivity. Perhaps she served as storyteller, ritualist, keeper of communal memory. Whatever her specific role, she clearly held status. And that status translated to privilege, including, almost certainly, priority access to warmth and food during the hardest seasons. Shamanic figures in hunter-gatherer societies typically occupy ambiguous positions. They are honored but also feared, consulted but also isolated, given resources but also burdened with expectations. In winter, this ambiguity would have been particularly acute. If you are the person believed to communicate with the forces that govern weather, animal movements, and human fortune, and winter is especially harsh, Does that reflect poorly on your abilities? Or does it make your intercession more desperately needed? The answer probably varied by individual and circumstance, but the archaeological record suggests that even in difficult winters, ritual specialists maintained their privileged positions. Their burials remain elaborate, their dwellings remain central, their access to warmth remained superior. This suggests communities believed in the value of these roles deeply enough to support them even when resources were scarce. At one site in southern France, researchers found evidence of a dwelling structure, a framework of mammoth bones and hides, that was notably larger than surrounding structures. Inside, the hearth was positioned centrally and showed evidence of particularly careful maintenance. The artifacts recovered from this dwelling included unusually elaborate carved objects and imported materials. The interpretation: this was a special dwelling, perhaps for a shaman, perhaps for a chief, perhaps for someone whose role combined both spiritual and practical authority. And notably, this person's hearth was positioned to receive optimal warmth distribution. The structure's entrance faced away from prevailing winds. The sleeping area was elevated slightly above the main floor, reducing cold air pooling. Even the stones around the hearth were selected and arranged with unusual care, flat-topped, tightly fitted, maximizing heat retention. Someone went to considerable effort to ensure this individual stayed warm. The community invested resources in their comfort. This was not accidental or incidental, it was deliberate prioritization. In Paleolithic terms, this represents significant inequality. While others shivered at the edges of caves, this person slept in relative warmth. While others rationed fuel carefully, this hearth burned more generously. The justification, presumably, was that this person's comfort served the community's interests, that their warmth enabled their work, whatever spiritual or leadership functions they performed. But from another perspective, this arrangement reveals an early form of the pattern that would define human societies for millennia to come. Those with power stay warm, while those without power endure cold. Fire in the Paleolithic was never purely practical, it was also sacred. Evidence for this comes from multiple sources. In some caves, hearths are positioned in locations that make practical sense, near entrances for ventilation, in naturally sheltered alcoves. But in other caves, hearths are placed in deliberately unusual locations, deep in cave systems, in chambers that require crawling through narrow passages to reach, in positions that suggest purpose beyond simple warmth. These remote hearths are often smaller than residential hearths. They contain different types of ash, suggesting they burn specific materials rather than whatever fuel was available, and they are frequently associated with cave art or enigmatic symbols. The interpretation: these were ritual fires, separate from the communal fires used for cooking and warmth. Reserved for specific purposes, probably tended by specific individuals. At Lascaux, the famous painted cave in France, researchers found evidence of hearth construction in chambers deep within the cave system, far from the entrance, in areas that would have been completely dark without artificial light. These hearths were not for living. No one slept in these deep chambers. The effort required to carry fuel into these remote locations, to maintain fires there, to work by their light while painting the magnificent animals on the walls. This was ritual labor, and ritual labor, in every society studied, is controlled labor. Someone decides when rituals occur, how they are performed, who participates. That someone is typically the society's spiritual elite. In Paleolithic communities, this meant shamans or elder ritualists who guarded knowledge of sacred practices. These individuals determined when the deep fires were lit, what was burned in them, who was allowed to approach, and this control over sacred fire likely translated to authority over communal fires as well. If you are the person who knows the deepest fire mysteries, who performs the rituals that supposedly ensure hunting success and protect against disaster, your voice carries weight in all fire-related decisions. Where fires are placed, How much fuel is allocated? Who sits closest? Power over ritual fire becomes power over practical fire, and power over fire, in a world where fire means survival, is power over people. This is not to suggest Paleolithic shamans were cynical manipulators. Many probably believed deeply in their roles, experienced genuine spiritual states, and served their communities with sincere intent. But belief and manipulation need not be mutually exclusive. A shaman who genuinely believes their rituals protect the community can simultaneously benefit from the material privileges that role provides, can sleep closer to the fire, can receive better food portions, can exercise authority over others. The pattern appears consistently across many Paleolithic sites. Ritual specialists receive preferential treatment, and that preferential treatment includes always superior access to warmth. In one particularly striking example from a site in Spain, researchers found evidence of a hearth that was maintained continuously for over 20 years, an extraordinary duration, suggesting this location held special significance. The hearth was surrounded by a careful arrangement of stones that created a kind of barrier, separating the fire area from the surrounding living space. Inside this barrier, artifact density was low, just a few specialized tools and ritual objects. Outside the barrier, artifact density was much higher, evidence of cooking, tool-making, daily activities. The interpretation: this hearth was sacred space, protected, set apart, access was controlled. And whoever controlled access to this sacred fire also controlled, by extension, the community's relationship with the spiritual forces the fire was believed to mediate. This is power. Subtle, perhaps, compared to the coercive power of later state systems, but real nonetheless. The power to determine who stands in the sacred warmth and who remains outside. The Paleolithic hierarchy of warmth did not disappear with the Ice Age. It evolved, adapted, persisted. As humans developed agriculture and permanent settlements, fire's social dimensions became more pronounced. Hearths moved from caves to constructed dwellings, from communal spaces shared by entire bands to household features controlled by individual families. In Neolithic villages, the size and quality of hearths varied by household. Elite families had larger, better constructed hearths, multiple hearths even. Meanwhile, poorer families shared hearths, or made do with smaller, less efficient versions. By the Bronze Age, fire had become fully integrated into hierarchical structures. Palaces had elaborate hearth rooms, kings sat closest to the fire. Court rituals centered around ceremonial flames. The hearth became a symbol of authority. To control fire was to rule. Medieval castles continued this pattern. The great hall's hearth was the social center, and proximity to it was determined by rank. Lords sat nearest the flames. Lesser nobles and household members arranged themselves in descending order of importance. Servants and lower-status individuals occupied the cold periphery. Even the language reflects this: hearth and home as synonyms for family and belonging. Being brought to the hearth meaning acceptance into a household. The hearth as the literal and metaphorical center of domestic life. But always, throughout all these developments, the basic pattern persisted. Those with power stayed warm, those without power endured cold. The technology changed, the social structures grew more complex, but the fundamental equation, warmth equals status, cold equals marginalization, remained constant. In Victorian England, wealthy homes had fireplaces in every room. Servants maintained these fires, ensuring their employers never experienced real cold. Meanwhile, the servants themselves slept in unheated attics, shivering through winter nights after spending their days stoking fires for others. Even today, this pattern continues in altered forms: climate-controlled homes for the wealthy, inadequate heating for the poor, Homeless individuals seeking warmth from steam, grates and shelter from the cold that kills dozens every winter in cities across the developed world. The technologies have advanced immeasurably. We can create warmth at the touch of a thermostat. We have insulation, central heating, electric blankets, heated car seats. Yet the distribution of warmth remains unequal, remains tied to resources, status, power. The Paleolithic shaman sleeping nearest the best fire and the modern executive in a climate-controlled office are separated by 25,000 years of technological development. But they share a basic commonality: their warmth is assured while others is not. Let us step back from this trajectory of inequality and consider a different aspect of the Paleolithic hierarchy. Yes, some people received preferential access to warmth. Yes, spiritual and practical authority conferred material privileges. But the inequality was bounded in ways that later systems were not. Paleolithic bands could not accumulate wealth in forms that persisted across generations. When you died, your tools might be passed on, but they were simply tools, functional objects, not capital. Your knowledge might live on if you taught it well, but even specialized knowledge had limits. The best hunter still aged, weakened, eventually lost their skills. The most powerful shaman still died, and their replacement might be more or less capable. And crucially, Paleolithic bands were small enough that everyone knew everyone. The shaman sleeping by the best fire was not an abstract authority, but a known individual. You had watched them grow up, perhaps, knew their quirks, their failures, their genuine skills. This intimacy placed informal limits on exploitation. A leader who took too much, who prioritized their comfort too egregiously, while others suffered, risked losing followers. And in a mobile society, people could leave, could join another band, could form their own group. The inequality existed, but it was constrained by practical and social realities. Moreover, even the elite were not truly comfortable by modern standards. The shaman's hearth might be better than others, but it was still a Paleolithic hearth, smoky, temperamental, requiring constant maintenance. Their fur wrappings might be the finest available, but they still itched, still carried parasites, still provided imperfect insulation. The gap between the elite and common was measured in degrees of discomfort, not in the presence or absence of suffering. Everyone suffered, some just suffered less. This is perhaps the most important distinction between Paleolithic inequality and later forms. The Paleolithic elite shared the basic conditions of existence with everyone else. They lived in caves or hide structures. They ate hunted and gathered foods. They faced the same diseases, the same winters, the same fundamental uncertainties. Their privilege was real, but relative. They were the warmest people in a cold world, not warm people in a world where others froze. As societies developed agriculture, accumulated surplus, built permanent structures, this changed. The elite could insulate themselves more completely from the hardships that defined others' lives, could live in different kinds of buildings, eat different kinds of food, inhabit fundamentally different worlds than the poor. But in the Paleolithic, the world was the same for everyone, just experienced at different distances from the fire. Imagine two people in that ancient winter landscape we have been exploring. One is a shaman, a spiritual leader, keeper of sacred knowledge, performer of the rituals that supposedly maintain balance between humans and the mysterious forces governing existence. This person sleeps closest to the central fire in the clan's cave, receives slightly larger food portions, is consulted before important decisions, wears the finest available furs decorated with carefully crafted ornaments. The other is a common hunter, skilled enough but not exceptional, contributing labor but holding no special status. This person sleeps near the cave's edge where cold air pools, makes do with adequate but unexceptional furs, speaks when spoken to in group discussions but rarely initiates decisions. On a particularly brutal night, when wind howls outside, and even the best-maintained fire seems inadequate against the killing cold, both people lie awake. The shaman, wrapped in furs, positioned in the warmest location, still feels cold. The stone beneath their body draws heat away. The draft that inevitably finds its way into the cave makes them shiver. They pull their furs tighter and hope the fire lasts until morning. The hunter, less well-positioned, suffers more intensely. Their feet are numb, their breath forms visible clouds even inside the shelter. They curl into a tighter ball, trying to minimize exposed surface area, and wonder if morning will come. Both are cold, one significantly more than the other, but both exist under the same cold sky, facing the same elemental force that cares nothing for human hierarchies. The ice makes no distinction. Wind does not bow to spiritual authority. Cold penetrates all shelters eventually, reaching even the privileged before it is done. This equality in vulnerability, this shared subjugation to forces beyond human control, perhaps placed limits on how extreme inequality could become in Paleolithic societies. When everyone, even the elite, is fundamentally vulnerable, when the most powerful person in the clan can still freeze to death if the fire fails, there is a baseline of shared experience that creates solidarity despite hierarchy. The elite depended on the common members, on hunters who brought food, on firekeepers who maintained flames, on women who prepared hides and bore children and passed on knowledge. The dependency was mutual in ways that later societies would obscure but could never entirely eliminate. And yet, despite everything, despite inequality, despite suffering, despite the countless individuals who froze in the dark, humans kept the flame alive, passed it generation to generation, maintained it through conditions that should have extinguished both fire and hope, built upon it until warmth became not just a nightly struggle, but an assumed foundation of existence. The journey from Paleolithic hearths to modern heating systems is long and complex, but it is continuous, each generation maintaining fire, improving techniques, developing technologies, until the act of creating warmth became progressively easier. The woman who fed fuel to dying embers at 3 a.m. in a freezing cave 25,000 years ago is connected, through an unbroken chain of effort, to the person who adjusts a thermostat today. The technologies are incomparably different. The basic human need is identical. We no longer struggle to keep fires burning through winter nights. We flip switches, turn dials, expect warmth as a right rather than a privilege. But the warmth we enjoy was built degree by countless people like Kaura, like the anonymous hunter shivering at the cave's edge, like the shaman who maintained sacred fires, like the child whose footprints preserved in clay marked a walk toward warmth on a cold day 30,000 years ago. They did not know they were building toward our comfort. They were simply trying to survive each night. But their survival, accumulated over millennia, became our foundation. The hierarchies they established, the unequal distribution of warmth based on status and power, also persist. We have not solved this, have not created a world where warmth is truly equal, but the fact that we recognize this inequality, that we can critique it, that we can imagine alternatives, this too is part of their legacy, because they survived long enough to pass something forward. Not just fire, but the capacity to question, to improve, to care about fairness and suffering. The flame they kept alive became civilization, with all its wonders and all its failures, all its comforts and all its injustices. We inherit both the warmth and the responsibility. And on cold nights, when we sit in heated rooms and take comfort for granted, perhaps we should remember someone once gave their sleep, their health, their life to keep the flame burning. Someone always cared enough. The fire continues, passed hand to hand, generation to generation, still burning, still requiring care, even now in forms we don't always recognize, but burning nonetheless. A small light against the dark, a warmth purchased at great cost, a gift from the deep past that we carry, however imperfectly, into an uncertain future. And so we arrive at the end of our journey, back from the frozen past, back from caves and smoke and the endless struggle against cold. Let us rest here for a moment. Let the stories settle. Let the distance between their world and ours become clear again. 25,000 years is an almost incomprehensible span of time. If you tried to count backward 1 year per second, it would take you nearly 8 months of continuous counting to reach the winter nights we have been exploring. 8 months to traverse the bridge between your warm bed and their cold caves. In that immense gulf of time, so much has changed, so much has been built, discovered, transformed. The people we have been remembering, Kaura and Taran, the nameless hunters and gatherers, the children who left footprints in clay, they could not have imagined the world you inhabit now, could not have conceived of electric lights that banish darkness at the touch of a switch, of heating systems that maintain constant warmth without anyone waking to feed flames, of insulation and thermostats and the casual abundance that defines modern comfort. To them, warmth was a negotiation with forces barely controlled, a desperate maintenance of small flames against overwhelming cold, a nightly uncertainty about whether morning would come. To you, warmth is expected, assumed, something that causes concern only when it fails, when the heating system breaks or the power goes out. And even then, the concern is relatively brief. Help is available. Solutions exist. You live in a world transformed by cumulative human effort across hundreds of generations. Every technological development, every innovation, every small improvement in how we create and maintain warmth has brought us here, to this moment, where you can lie in a comfortable bed, in a controlled climate, without any immediate threat from the elements. And this is an extraordinary gift, easy to overlook because it is ubiquitous, easy to take for granted because we have never known otherwise, but it was purchased with the effort we have been describing, with the sleepless nights of firekeepers, with the frost-bitten fingers of hunters, with the quiet sacrifices of people who burned their own possessions to keep flames alive through impossible winters. They did not do this for you specifically. They did not know you would exist. They were simply trying to survive each night. But their survival, accumulated and compounded across millennia, became the foundation upon which everything else was built. Agriculture required settlements. Settlements required reliable warmth through winter. Reliable warmth required fire technology sophisticated enough to heat larger structures for longer periods. Each development built on previous developments. Each generation inherited the knowledge of those before and added their own small improvements, until the chain of human effort stretched from the first controlled fire to the climate-controlled world you inhabit. The caves are still there, silent, mostly empty now except for researchers who visit periodically, documenting, studying, trying to read meaning from ash and stone. The hearths are cold, have been cold for thousands of years. The last flames that burned in those ancient fire pits died before written language existed, before agriculture, before civilization in any form we would recognize. But the patterns remain. Circular arrangements of fire-cracked stone, layers of compacted ash, charcoal fragments that can still be dated, identified, analyzed. These remnants are not dramatic. No one visits them expecting the grandeur of pyramids or the elegance of Greek temples. They are simply there. Subtle shadows on cave floors, discolorations on stone, evidence that requires patience and expertise to interpret. Yet they are profound in their own way because they represent something universal, something that connects all humans across all time, the need for warmth, the drive to survive, the willingness to care for each other, however imperfectly, through the darkest nights. When archaeologists discover a new Paleolithic hearth, they are finding a place where someone once knelt to blow life into dying embers, where someone once added fuel with practiced hands, where someone once felt relief as warmth spread through cold air. They are finding evidence of care, of sustained attention, of the kind of persistent human effort that rarely gets remembered in grand historical narratives, but which makes all history possible. The people who tended these fires left no names, no monuments, no lasting mark on the landscape except ash. But they succeeded in their task. They kept the flame alive. They survived. They passed forward both their genes and their knowledge. And here you are, the inheritor of their success, lying in warmth they could not have imagined, connected to them by an unbroken thread of human persistence. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you do not need to worry about the fire dying. Do not need to wake in darkness to add fuel. Do not need to sacrifice your possessions to maintain warmth. You have been freed from those necessities by the accumulated progress of your ancestors, by countless people whose names are forgotten but whose efforts persist in the technologies that surround you. This is worth acknowledging, worth feeling grateful for, if gratitude is an emotion that still finds you in these quiet moments before sleep. You are warm because someone cared, many someones, an unbroken chain of care stretching back to the beginning of human use of fire. And that care was not abstract, it was specific, practical, embodied. It was a mother checking her child's hands for frostbite, a hunter sharing his portion with an elder, a firekeeper waking every few hours through the night to maintain flames that protected sleeping clan members. It was Kaura burning her sleeping board to keep others warm. It was Taran returning to the fire with frozen hands. It was the unnamed woman who tended sacred flames in the deep caves. It was the child who walked across clay toward warmth on a day 30,000 years ago. All of them contributed. All of them mattered. All of them are present, in a sense, in the comfort you feel now. The warmth you experience is not just a product of technology. It is a product of care, accumulated across time, passed from generation to generation, like fire itself. Imagine just for a moment that you are back in that cave, that the comfortable bed beneath you has become cold stone, that the steady warmth surrounding you has been replaced by drafts and smoke and the uncertain heat of a small fire that must be rationed carefully. Imagine hunger as a constant companion. Not the temporary hunger of missing a meal, but the deep, persistent emptiness that shapes every thought, every movement, every decision. Imagine knowing that if you sleep too deeply, you might not wake, that cold can steal life without drama, that warmth is not guaranteed, that survival requires constant vigilance. Imagine this as your reality, not for a night, but for an entire season, for a lifetime, for generation after generation after, and then return to where you actually are, warm, safe. The struggles that consumed your ancestors reduced to abstract historical curiosity. The threats they faced daily rendered harmless by technology and social organization. The contrast is staggering. The gift is immense. You did nothing to earn this comfort except be born into this time, this place, this moment in human history where warmth is abundant and cold is merely an inconvenience. But perhaps that recognition itself is valuable. Perhaps understanding what you have been spared, the struggles you did not need to face, creates a kind of perspective, a gentleness toward yourself and others, a recognition that existence, even now, even in comfort, contains challenges enough without adding the trials your ancestors endured. They fought against cold so that you would not have to. They maintained fire through impossible conditions so that eventually humanity would develop systems that made firekeeping unnecessary. Their gift to you is the freedom to concern yourself with other things, to think thoughts beyond survival, to create, to dream, to rest without fear. This is what they bought with their discomfort. This is what their persistence purchased. And you are the beneficiary, lying in warmth, drifting towards sleep, carrying within you the capacity for care that kept them alive through endless winter nights. Outside your window, the world continues. Day follows night follows day, in the same rhythm that governed Paleolithic lives, though we experience it now with such different certainty. The seasons turn. Winter still comes, though it has lost most of its teeth in the developed world. Cold still exists, though we have learned to push it away from our bodies, our homes, our lives. The fundamental forces have not changed. The earth still tilts on its axis, creating seasons. Wind still blows. Snow still falls. The physics of heat loss remains constant. What has changed is our relationship to these forces. We are no longer at their mercy in the way our ancestors were. We have insulated ourselves technologically and socially from the immediate life or death consequences of winter cold. This is progress, undeniably. Few of us would choose to return to Paleolithic conditions to face those struggles directly. But perhaps having remembered them, having spent this time considering what life was like for those who came before, we can carry forward a small piece of their awareness, an appreciation for warmth, a recognition of its value, a gratitude for the comfort we inhabit. Not dramatic gratitude that requires action or demonstration, just a quiet acknowledgement, a soft awareness that settles in the back of your mind as you drift towards sleep. You are warm. You are safe. You are the inheritor of countless acts of care, stretching back into the deep past. And in your rest, in your comfort, you honor those who struggled so persistently to keep the flame alive. Let the story fade now. Let the images dissolve, the caves, the smoke, the figures huddled around small fires in the endless cold. They have returned to the past where they belong. You remain here, in the present, in warmth and safety. Your breathing is steady. Your body relaxes into comfort. The weight of blankets is a gentle pressure, nothing like the heavy, itchy furs that once defined winter survival. The darkness around you is peaceful. No threat lurks in it. No predators. No killing cold. Just the ordinary darkness of a room at night. Familiar and safe. If you listen carefully, you might hear the distant hum of your heating system, the subtle background noise of climate control, maintaining the temperature that keeps you comfortable, a sound so constant you usually do not notice it, but it is there, working while you rest, fulfilling the function that once required someone to wake every few hours and feed fuel to dying flames. That task has been automated, mechanized, removed from human hands. This is efficiency. This is progress. This is good. But somewhere in the mechanism, in the concept of maintained warmth, the spirit of Kaura persists, the care she embodied, the persistent attention to the flame that must not die, the willingness to sacrifice for the warmth of others. These qualities have not disappeared. They have been translated into different forms, into engineering, into social systems, into the accumulated knowledge that allows us to create warmth without individual martyrdom. But the core remains: human capacity for care, human persistence against difficulty, human ingenuity in solving the problem of survival. You carry this capacity within you, inherited from those who came before, ready to be expressed in whatever forms your particular life requires. But tonight, you need not express it. Tonight, you can simply rest, can receive the gift of comfort purchased by your ancestors' struggle, can drift into sleep, knowing that the flame is tended, that warmth is maintained, that you are safe. the fire continues burning, passed hand to hand across time. Burning still informs both literal and metaphorical. In the warmth that surrounds you, in the care you might show others, in the persistence of human life despite all challenges, burning steadily, reliably, with a patience learned across millennia, and you, resting in its warmth, need do nothing but breathe and drift, and allow sleep to come in its own time, gentle and inevitable as dawn after the longest winter night. The struggles of the past have receded, the cold has been pushed back, the darkness, while present, is not threatening. You are here. You are warm. You are safe. And in the morning, when light returns, you will carry forward the gift you received tonight. The awareness that warmth is precious, that comfort is earned across generations, that the simple act of rest in safety is itself a kind of victory. But morning is distant still, hours away, and in this moment there is only the present, only the steady rhythm of your breathing, only the gentle weight of sleep approaching. Let it come. Let the story end. Let the past rest in peace while you rest in comfort. The fire burns on, the warmth persists, and you, descendant of those who fought against the cold, can finally, peacefully, easily rest. Sleep well, traveller. The long winter has ended, the fire is tended, and in the morning warmth will still be waiting.